Board of Commissioners meeting for Monday, November 30th, 2020. We are conducting the meeting via Zoom. We are streamed live on YouTube. You can make comments by emailing your comment to public@radnor.org. I will check now. I don't see anything yet, but as comments come in, we'll read them as we get to the appropriate agenda item. We will start, as always, with the Pledge of Allegiance.
Wait, Jack, I think it's public comment at radnor.org, not just public, isn't it?
I thought it was just public. Let me double check.
Commissioner, it is public comment at radnor.org. That's the.
There you go. Thank you. Public comment at radnor.org. Sorry, and thank you for the correction. We'll get started with the Pledge of Allegiance. By way of reminder, those of you who are in front of a fixed camera don't need to stand up, but as always, you can if you want to. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Moving on to public participation, and again, I got that wrong at the beginning, public comment at radnor.org. But at the moment, we don't have any. So moving on to the discussion of ordinance number 2020-22, adoption of the final 2021 comprehensive budget by setting the township real estate tax millage rate and adopting appropriations for 2021. I'd like to get the conversation started by outlining what I view as the key variables for us to be discussing. And then obviously I'd like to throw it up to the board to either discuss those or correct me with some other variables that I've missed. Number one, there's the actual millage rate. We are required by law to keep that millage rate revenue neutral. Bill, am I correct that we have not yet gotten numbers from the county? So we don't know what the millage rate would be for a revenue neutral amount?
That is correct. The last we heard is we're supposed to get those numbers tomorrow. I understand that there might have been some technical issues at the county. So as of now, we're expecting them tomorrow.
Okay, so we don't know the number yet. By law, we are permitted to move the ultimate number up or down a little bit. None of us have proposed moving the number up, and that's not in the budget that we have, but at least technically that's a variable. There are a couple of staff requests that are outstanding. There are requests for 3 additional police officers and accreditation for the police department and an additional engineer for the township, as well as a few other requests that we should probably discuss. The budget that has been proposed by the administration does not include any payments for Opeb, which is our other post-employment benefits fund. We have what was a plan that was proposed by CARFAC that would require us to make contributions to a trust fund every year in order to be able to fully fund our Opeb by 2040 something. What was the year, Bill?
I think 2049.
Okay, got it. I'm just proud I got the first 3 digits right, frankly. We need to either instruct the administration to come back to us with a budget that fully funds Opeb. We need to instruct the administration to come back to us with a plan that would fund Opeb while not funding it this year. Or I guess we need to find some other alternative going forward for how we're going to deal with that, including just making payments on an annual basis, and it can be somebody else's problem when we get there. But obviously from the way I'm phrasing that, that's not really what I would like to do. And then the last issue, the last variable that we'll probably need to discuss is what payments, if any, the township is going to make to the 501c3s that we have traditionally supported. Those payments have, in the proposed budget, remained flat based on what we paid last year. So we probably need to have a conversation about whether they should go up, down, or remain the same. I'm sure that I missed some issue that's important to others. I can tell you those are the ones off the top of my head that are most important to me. So with that, I'm going to toss it to the group.
So Jack, are you asking us to weigh in on what else is important to us, or if there's anything beyond what you've already mentioned?
I mean, I think that there's probably issues that are going to be important to the individual commissioners and probably to me that I've just forgotten about, frankly, that I'd be interested in hearing. I'd be interested in hearing comment on the issues that I outlined. Those were the ones that jumped out at me as the decisions that we would have to make. We don't have anything in front of us to vote on. This is just a discussion. So whatever issues are important to you guys, we should put out there.
Well,
Everybody
Jack,
last
I'm Sean, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Jake.
All right, thanks. Jack, my number one concern is what's the appetite on the board right now in how we're going to fund the gap, knowing that we're not going to see the revenue that we had projected and forecasted last year. Reading through this, it looks like spending hasn't gone down, and in fact there's requests for additional spending. So is the mood of the board that we're going to raise taxes again, or that we're going to look at using the reserve fund, which was something that I had recommended doing last year before we raised taxes?
You asked me what the mood of the board is, and that's for everybody individually to decide, obviously. I will tell you that for myself, I don't view last year as a year where the reserve fund was an appropriate time to spend down, because last year was not a true emergency. This is a pretty catastrophic emergency. It's tough to imagine something that would hit the township harder than completely shutting down a large fraction of the businesses. This, in my mind, is what the reserve fund exists for. We're probably going to have to spend some both this year and next year. And then ideally, we will end up being able to replenish that fund as our ordinance requires us to do. But for my money, yeah, we would spend from the reserve fund.
Along the lines of Jake's question, Jake mentioned, well, are we going to raise taxes? And it applies whether we're just balancing the budget or adding new staff. If we have to be revenue neutral, explain how the raising taxes or adding new staff would even work if it was even decided the board wanted to do that. In other words, is that an additional appropriation on top of the revenue neutral millage, or how would that work as a procedural matter?
No, so the revenue neutrality affects our millage rate that we set. We are permitted to raise millage as much as 10% off of revenue neutral. No one has proposed that we do so. Instead, the proposal from the administration is to keep millage rates flat, which would mean that we would receive the exact same number of dollars in 2021 that we actually receive in 2020.
Oh, all right. So that's my question. My question was, if we have to have revenue neutral as a hard number, you're saying no, you could have revenue neutral plus 10% under the existing rules.
Yeah, in order to stay revenue neutral, we would then spend down from the reserve fund.
So you can change the millage rate by 10%, but still must remain revenue neutral. So you're not seeking a tax increase on the citizens with that 10%.
No, sorry, that I was unclear when I said that. My understanding of the statute is that we are required to set an initial millage rate in our budget discussions, which is revenue neutral. We are then permitted by law to increase it by as much as 10%. We, in a year where there was not COVID-19 and reassessment that has an unequal effect on residents versus commercial entities, I think I can say this board really wouldn't consider a 10% increase. No one has proposed an increase at all, let alone 10%. I'm just kind of putting it out there. You're allowed to do it. I don't think that anyone has proposed that we would.
And it's not proposed in the draft budget that we've reviewed.
Correct.
Bob.
Right, and I'm not proposing it either. My question was, is it allowed? So that the answer is yes.
That's my understanding. You can move by as much as 10%. This is a year where I would urge for myself, not speaking for either the administration or other members of the board, but I would urge that this is the year that we have a reserve fund for. This is the rainy day that we save a rainy day fund for.
I tend to agree with you, and I would also say that I think that of all years, it would not be one to raise taxes to close the gap, because many of our residents are also hurt by the pandemic.
Yeah.
Is there or is there not a certain number within that reserve fund that we cannot go below?
0.
My issue with touching that, with touching the reserve fund, is how that affects our bonds and getting money in the future. Obviously, we don't want to take too much where it's going to cost us more on the credit side. So I think that's just something, I don't know if Bill or Bob, Bill or Bob want to touch on, but it's just something that we need to keep in mind, because we have a great debt rating, and I know that Bill was able to do some swaps that saved us some even more money this year, and let's keep that going.
So it's my understanding that there is a policy on the fund balance that keeps us to 8.8. Am I reading that information correctly? And that we would be in danger of going below that. Bill, can you speak to that?
Yep, I can jump in here. I can answer a couple of those questions, including Commissioner Enderle's, with regard to what the floor might be, which is in line with your question, Moira. So yeah, I'm going to try to share the screen here. Let's see if this works. Sorry. Can everyone see a slide, general fund cash balance?
Yes.
Yep.
Excellent. All right. So this is, sorry, I need to minimize Zoom here so I can see the numbers. There we go. So our fund balance policy dictates that, and it's the general fund balance. So it dictates that in any given year, we maintain 15% of expenditures, except during times when our business tax revenue makes up more than, I think 40% of the revenue, 30 or 40% off the top of my head. It's one of those two numbers. In any case, our Act 511 or our business tax revenue exceeds that percentage, or has exceeded that percentage every year since 2012. So when that happens, there's an additional 10% of fund balance required. So the total then becomes 25%. And as this year has shown, that policy or that additional 10% was a good decision to have, because it's the business tax revenue group that is so volatile based on economic conditions. But in addressing how the policy affects us number-wise, this table here kind of steps us through the 3 years of activity. So 2019, we ended with roughly 11.2 million in balance. We're projecting that in 2020, we'll have a net expense of 1.7 million, which will bring our fund balance down to about 9.5 million at the end of this year. The target fund balance at 15% of expenditures is going to be roughly 8 million. 8.8 million in that ballpark. So at the end of this year, we're projected to still be north of the fund balance floor. So we'll still be in compliance with one more month to go. For 2021, as proposed, we would utilize 1.5 million in fund balance with revenues of 33.8 million and expenses of 35.3. So the 1.5 million we would utilize from our fund balance. bringing us down to roughly $8 million in cash balance. Now, based on 35 million in expenditures, that's the $8.8 million that the fund balance will require. So at the end of 21, we would be below that floor. The fund balance policy then dictates that the township would have 2 years to come back into compliance. So by December 31st of 2023, we would need to be back into compliance. In the last two lines here.
So our compliance is not zero.
Well, yeah, so compliance with the fund balance policy is 25% of expenditures.
Okay.
Compliance from an absolute operating standpoint is zero. In terms of the board decision making, you could decide to go as far below that fund balance floor as you would like. So I mean, that's a board decision. Obviously, the further we go below the fund balance floor, we would either want to contemplate changing the fund balance policy, or it makes it harder to come back up into compliance. The last two rows here just take into consideration the additional personnel requests and show what those numbers might be. So without any of those additional personnel items, the fund balance for 2021 is forecasted to be $8 million.
We're also permitted under the actual financial policy, as I understand it, to bring ourselves down below those numbers, so long as we also come up with a plan and take action necessary to restore the unassigned fund balance to acceptable levels.
That's absolutely correct. And the policy says that the board has 2 years to do that. Or 2 years, I guess the clock starts when we actually fall below the floor. So,
Right.
we're contemplating it now. At the end of 2020, we're projected to still be above the floor. So we would have 2021 to start working on what the plan will be to come back into compliance. And without changing the policy, we would have until the end of 2023 to be back into compliance.
So we can change the policy and go to zero, or we can comply with the policy, go to zero, and create a action plan that would bring us back to necessary levels within 2 years.
Operationally, I would strongly suggest not going to zero.
Well, yeah, once you go to zero, there's not really any more net.
Yeah, well, yeah.
Bill, that was extremely helpful. Thank you for taking
welcome.
time to go through that.
And then just real quickly with regard to Commissioner Farhi's question on bond rating, I obviously I can't speak for Moody's, but I've spoken with Moody's at various points for the last 20 years. And what I've found is that, they give us points for having the appropriate policies and then following them. So if we dip below the fund balance floor for a year and immediately come up with an action plan to bring us back up above that floor within the 2-year window, I can't suspect that Moody's will punish the township in any way, especially given the circumstances, the unprecedented circumstances in terms of what's gone on economically. Municipalities across the country are facing, similar decisions and similar situations. So, short of Moody's doing an across-the-board kind of adjustment on credit ratings, which they've done in the past, I can't imagine that they would punish the township for a 1-year spend down with an immediate correction put into place. And just in terms of terminology, we refunded bonds this year, which will save us money. The term swap is not a popular word in the Moody's world, especially when if we're talking about derivative debt instruments.
My apologies.
Yeah, no worries. Just
I
the
heard that
township
too.
does not have any swaps.
I heard that too.
Can you speak a little bit to what a plan to write it to, level set it would be? Like, what does that look like? Having
Yeah,
not been here before.
it's going to be no matter what, I think it's going to be a combination of a lot of different factors. Hopefully the first factor is an economic correction, which would bring our business taxes back up to where they were pre-2020, closer to what they were in 2018 or 17, or, depending on economic situations or circumstances, maybe back to 2017 and prior. So if we go back to those levels, that's $1.5 million plus in revenue immediately that we would realize, and that would obviously take a big step towards balancing the revenue and expense operating statement. And then anything, then the decisions become increased revenue or decreased expenses to the point where the revenues exceed expenses and we start building back up fund reserves. So it's not too dissimilar from, a real simplified house budget. Make more than you spend and you save what you save the excess until you're back into compliance.
Thank you.
Two comments that I have on that. Number one, I don't like to use the term compliance with that policy, Bill. I think that conformity would be better. It's not compliance because that makes it sound like there's some state rule or something. There's no requirement to have 8 million in reserve. So I prefer to use the term conformity, but I'll leave it to you. And secondly, I don't think it's reasonable to think that we're going to get business revenues back up in the following year. So to build in, we're going to simply come back up to pre-lockdown levels, I think is unrealistic. And so I don't think we would want to count on that.
So two quick things. First of all, yeah, Commissioner, you are correct that our fund balance policy is Radnor specific. It's one that went through CARFAC a number of years ago, was presented to the board, and the board at the time adopted it. There's nothing short of going below zero that we need to be compliant with, other than best practice. So conformity versus compliance, you are correct that this is a Radnor specific ordinance. Then just to be clear on what we're projecting revenues for 2021, I mean, that's the primary reason why we would be spending down fund balances. We're still projecting those business related revenues to be short, something in the line of, where they were this year, plus a little bit of recovery just from hopefully an optimistic view of things, getting back to some sense of normalcy next year.
All right, my comments were with respect to the plan to regain conformity with the policy. So that would be 2022 and beyond.
Yeah, 2022, 2023.
So Bill, my two questions are, and I wonder if, I mean, I'm guessing that everybody fully understands what's in the budget, what isn't in the budget. So I guess the first thing I want to talk about is what isn't, which would be the Opeb funding, with the exception of the pay-as-you-go. And if you could elaborate on that just a little bit, and then on what the plan might be moving forward. And I know you haven't had opportunity to formulate an entire plan. I know the last one we had, I think took, a long time to figure out and put in place. And you note in the budget book, the concerns you have with that plan. And certainly we're seeing those, very plainly, especially now this year. So if we could talk a little bit about that.
I'd be happy to. First of all, the plan that was done was built in large part by the members of CARFAC way back when. And, obviously I don't have what municipalities around the country were doing, but certainly in Pennsylvania and in this region, the plan was unprecedented. It was comprehensive and a fantastic plan. It's one drawback, and this is the current concern I've raised, that we've only learned through time, is that the plan was built on revenues that have turned out to be too volatile to sustain the plan. So last 3 years, as we've gone through these budget cycles, OPEB has kind of been the ping pong ball that we try to figure out what to do with to fit in, because revenues are falling short, and it's in all 3 years has been the business tax revenues. But in terms of the plan itself and the components, there's 4 components of it. There's a reduction in benefits that went into effect for hires January 1st, 2013 and moving forward. The reduction in benefit on the civilian side is elimination. So any employee that we hire post 1/1/13 is not eligible for the benefit. On the police side, the benefit is significantly reduced to only cover the retiring officer and spouse. So that's component 1. Component 2 is for those officers hired that do get a future benefit, that we would immediately start pre-funding those benefits. So since 2013, there's been a line item in the police budget where we have been transferring those dollars into the OPEB trust fund, putting the money aside for when those officers someday retire. There's funds there to pay for that benefit, which is how the program would work with everything else. If we were designing the plan today, that's how we'd want it to work. Then the last 2 components are the 2 biggies in terms of dollars. So we have the pay-as-you-go piece, which is in round terms about $2 million. And that represents what we can expect to pay in 2021 for our retirees' health insurance premiums for that year. And then the other piece, and this is the other big piece, this is the 1.8 million that's not included in the 2021 budget. That is a set aside, a kind of a catch-up payment for all of the years where the benefit was offered and no money was saved up. So that's in essence the biggest piece of the plan, is we put that kind of money aside for, until 2049. And then there's enough cash set aside in the OPEB trust fund to then pay for all of the future benefits of the retirees at that point. Understanding that any employees that still get the benefit when they retire, which would only be our police officers, that we would continue to pre-fund them. So out of those 4 components, the big piece that's not in the 2021 budget is the funding of that pay down piece. So that's 1.8 million. So the other component of this is that this plan went into effect in 2013. We've obviously 7 years have gone by. We now have an idea of the personnel turnover, both civilian and police. So it would be prudent for us to do a refresh on the plan and work with Mock and Hop and Carfax again to send updated roster information to the actuarial company, have them rerun the numbers, and then present the plan in a similar format, but back to us with updated, refreshed numbers.
I need it.
And we can go from there.
10 or 15 minutes.
So and is that something that you think that we can look at and have ready to move forward next year? There'll still be the issue of how we fund it. Is that still kind of the elephant in the room, I guess, how we will go ahead and fund that?
Without question, that'll be the biggest decision point. And the good news is the board at the time, back in 2013, elected a 10-year ramp up. So that was the 200,000 increase per year to get us to what the actuarial company calls the annual required contribution, which is what we are shooting for. Because once you reach that amount over a certain period of time, you'll have enough cash set aside. There's no policy or no mandate that comes down from some other authority that tells us exactly how to fund this. So if a 10-year ramp up is too aggressive given revenue levels, then we do a 15 or 20 year. We can play with those variables to find, what we want ultimately, what the board feels comfortable with funding going forward.
I just think it's really important to have something in place. Otherwise, I think it just becomes, a continuation of kind of kicking the can down the road. If we aren't addressing it, I would love, if we're not going to have that in this year's budget, to have a really solid plan moving forward. And if that is, extending it out even further, reducing the annual payments, whatever that's going to look like, I just would really want to see and have something in place so that we know we're going to get back to it. It's really easy to not get back to it.
Absolutely. And actually, you bring up one of probably the most critical reason why you want to pre-fund the benefits is that theoretically, you map out what the annual healthcare costs are, the pay-as-you-go portion, if you will, that those costs will grow at a faster rate. And so at some point, the pay-as-you-go piece is going to be more expensive than if we were just paying the annual required contribution. So that's why it makes sense to have the money set aside. So, the other important factor is we have 8 more years of knowledge on how much healthcare costs. So maybe the projections used back in 2012 when the plan was being developed, they're definitely different. So this would give us a refresh on what those might look like.
Okay. Is that something you would see us working on in the next year and having something for the next budget?
Yeah, I would think it would be good to have CARFAC work on this. The template, the playbook is already out there on all of the different elements to it. Our actuarial firm are experts on our situation, so I think they can refresh that pretty quickly. Then it's just a matter of, asking CARFAC to, come up with a couple different scenarios and present them to the board for consideration. And I think all that can be done, I'd say maybe end of summer, early fall next year, realistically, and then it can be tied in with, the meatier part of our budget discussions a year from now.
Bill, Lisa, are you done?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. To Commissioner Borowski's point about kicking the can down the road, if this year's payment would be 1.8, right? Not budgeted, but what would next year look like if we don't do anything this year?
So if we threw the switch back on next year and wanted to pick up right where we left off, it would either be 1.8 or a full $2 million. And that, unless business tax revenues come back stronger than any of us anticipate they will, that'll be tough to swallow next year. So I think, it's going to be some. I honestly don't know. This is what we would ask CARFAC to take a look at and come up with some different ideas. It may be starting a new ramp up to get us to that annual required contribution number, because again, what we were building the ramp up funding on for the last 8 to 9 years has been the business taxes. And that just hasn't, the business taxes haven't been reliable enough to do that. So I think part of the recommendation or part of the analysis needs to be, building the replacement plan or the refreshed plan on revenues that are more stable.
And is there any value in sort of a compromise number where we're not stepping away from the annual amount totally, but say we do the 800 and sort of look away at $1 million?
Yeah, so I mean that's the other beauty of it. So the OPEB is different from, say, pension, where the pension funding has very strict state funding mandates that we have to follow every year, and we have to meet certain criteria, and we have to report if we miss that criteria. which is why we adopt an MMO resolution in September of every year. OPEB it's entirely up to us on how we feel it's best to fund it. So if we set a dollar amount and say that's our dollar amount, we're going to pay as you go plus X, for the next 50 years, then that's it. The board has that discretion here. There's no mandated funding criteria or horizon that we have to meet in terms of reaching fully funded status.
So can
you ask?
Bill, can thanks, Damien. Where does that money, just have a couple questions. So where does that money go? Does that go in a separate account? Could that go, because are we ever spending more money per year in benefits? So is it ever, we've paid more in benefits and that count, is that a deficit? Could that go into a more aggressive, could you put it almost in an investment account, in some kind of account that would, I don't want to say aggressive, not like it's going to go in a stock account, but it could go into some other account where it's just sitting in a money market if we're looking at a 30-year period. Does that make sense to you? Where does that money go?
That absolutely makes sense. And in fact, when the OPEB funding plan was adopted, at the same time, the board established a trust fund or a trust account for those dollars to be housed in. So every dollar that has been contributed to the funding plan through the years has gone into the trust. So it cannot be spent on other township related items. And within that trust, it is treated investment wise exactly the same as our pension funds. So they are invested at a more aggressive rate with an assumed return. I think our pension assets are assumed, I think we've knocked it down to 7.5% annual return. So the OPEB assets are being invested on that same trajectory.
So, okay.
But one other thing you brought up that's important is there's never a deficit, or there hasn't been a deficit yet, because at a minimum in every year we've contributed the pay-as-you-go piece. So the amount of expenses that we have to keep the insurance turned on, we've contributed to the trust to pay those expenses. So the amounts we've put in over and above pay-as-you-go are in the trust being invested and growing in the market.
Okay. So in theory, assuming that the trust and the people that run the trust do it well, there is an advantage to putting more money in now because you're allowing that money to compound and grow exponentially. Am I correct on that?
Sure, if you got the money.
Okay. So, and I know we spoke about this, and you're going to kill me for bringing this up because we spoke about this in private, and I see that smile on your face.
I haven't killed anyone yet, so.
Yeah, well, it's a good thing the Christmas tree lighting was yesterday and not tomorrow. I think you know where we're going with this. So based upon that philosophy of, money makes money, would it be feasible, and I know you said no, but I still do want to bring this to the board's attention, to maybe look at buying out some of these people's pensions? They may be in a different situation. We don't necessarily know. Their spouse may have benefits, etc. I know you're going to kill me for asking you this, but I just want to look at everything because this plan is not working. So I think that we should kind of shake everything. I know that you don't believe that is a feasible plan, but is there any, would there be any benefit to at least entertaining that exercise, if that's fair?
Yeah, let me just say, I've never heard anybody talk about that, so I think it's a good idea to explore. And I'm assuming, Sean, you meant not pensions, but OPEB benefits, buying out OPEB benefits.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah.
Right. I mean, the OPEB benefit is for the pre-2013 people, is for the police, his spouse and family, health care for life. And then post-2013 is healthcare for the spouse and the police officer, it's very, very rich. I mean, you know, is there any way that it could be bought out? I think that's a great idea.
Yeah, I mean, so we can definitely make that part of the analysis, and we can take a look at that. So yes, I mean, if that's the will of the board, that's something that we'll definitely look at. My only hesitation, I shared this with Commissioner Farhi, is that you know, based on the benefit levels that these folks are realizing, the number to buy it out.
Too expensive?
Well, it could. I can't imagine where it's not going to be. But if we do the analysis, then we can say with some level of certainty that we took a look at it. So that's
How many people is at the pre-2013? How many people are still?
Bob,
Sorry, if you don't know.
that's all right. I'm gonna estimate. We have about 100 retirees, so it's going to be close to that number. The pre-2013s, and on top of that, we have, you know, our active employees. So, you know, roughly 200. I'm going to say.
So it could be 100 potentially pre-2013, and Rich, did you say for the employee, spouse, and dependents, or healthcare for life?
For life.
Yeah. Pre-2013, that was the benefit.
Wowza. Okay.
Yeah, so
That's going to be expensive.
The number is, at the end of the year last year, there were 103 active plan members. So members who were
retired.
Well, inactive, not yet receiving the benefit. So those who are employed, but you will be receiving a benefit in the future. That's the police, those union folks, and those non-union folks, all hired before 2013.
Yeah, and a couple of things to keep in mind. So first of all, I would think that if we're going to talk about a buyout, we would also approach active employees, not just the retirees. Actually, the active employees may be more willing to participate than someone who's already retired and receiving the benefit. The other important element in terms of benefit is that once they reach Medicare eligible age, the township's health insurance becomes a wraparound, and their primary insurance at that point is Medicare. So there is a reduction in benefit and cost. Well, not a reduction in benefit, but a reduction in cost, because we're no longer providing all of the benefit.
We become the supplemental as opposed to the primary. Is that? Okay.
But that's for the retired employees, so that presumably their children are younger than that.
Well, yeah, and they're eligible till 26.
Oh, there's a cutoff for.
Oh, okay, good. Okay.
It's like, woo.
I was like, damn.
Yeah, no, they're only covered up until we're legally required to cover.
Okay. Okay.
We don't have any 40-year-old children out there with their own families on their retired parents' healthcare.
We do have a spouse.
We do have spouses, yes. But I think this conversation's been good. If nothing else, there's a lot of components to this that, you know, refreshing all of the different parts makes a lot of sense. And then having some conversations next year on how we want to proceed. Knowing that we have a pretty good plan to work off of, we just have to back it with something that's more reliable, so this doesn't become an annual conversation where it's OPEB on, OPEB off type of thing.
So can you, for at least my benefit, because I haven't had this discussion before, but when you say that it is tied to the business tax revenue, and I unfortunately did not review the plan from 8 years ago. So what does that mean? You were projecting business taxes and basing the increase every year on a number that was a projection?
Yeah, so the way it worked up until 2 years ago was that the business taxes grew annually by an amount sufficient enough to cover the growing OPEB contributions. And then what happened is the business taxes reversed on us. And then 2 years ago, the board increased the millage to try to make up for enough to keep the OPEB plan turned on. But we ran into the same problem again last year, and now here we are this year. So there were.
So it's not tied to the taxes. Otherwise, for the last 3 years, we wouldn't have made that contribution at all.
Yeah, so it's not directly tied to it, but it fit within the budget because there were sufficient business tax revenues. That was the component of the budget that was going up. And in fact, many of those years, the township had no change in its millage rate.
So the increase, what is the increase set at on that plan per year?
So we're ramping up by 200,000 per year until we reach, I think it's 2.2 million. And then it flattens out at 2.2 million because at that point we are now contributing the annual required contribution. And then it stays flat until 2049 when we reach fully funded status. And then there's actually a cliff because we no longer need the 2.2 million because now we're fully funded. Actually, we wouldn't need 4.2 million because not only are we fully funded, but there's enough assets in the trust to pay for the annual healthcare going forward. So there is a huge cliff in 2049.
If we're all alive.
That board is going to be really happy.
Well, yeah, it was discussed, and I forget all the details, but it might make sense as we approach that that intersection that maybe we start ramping the dollar amount down or reallocating those to other needs of the township or whatever the board at the time decides to do, just so there is not this huge drop off in expense. But
well, doesn't that give us the opportunity to kind of maybe smooth it out and we could extend further? I mean, maybe we won't reach that goal in 2049, but maybe we can smooth it out and be able to keep up with it better than we can right now, or at least looking at it, thinking that we can.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, in very overly simplistic terms, as long as our OPEB funding plan is cheaper or more affordable than the growing cost of pay-as-you-go, it's a good plan. Well, some folks may want to get that cash in there right away and get rid of this huge liability that we're carrying on our books. But in terms of operating and trying to balance, the balance sheet and the operating statement, whatever number is more affordable in the long run is going to be the better plan.
Okay.
When I'm 86, I can't wait to get a postcard saying that the OPEB benefit has been paid off.
We'll have a little party.
Well, if no one else has anything else, so I guess what I'd like to talk about, you guys came forward, or the staff, you all came forward with some, ideas, some things that you'd like to see funded or have funded, which I'm going to, so that stuff is not in the budget right now. And I guess, to Jack's point earlier, can we talk about this, police accreditation, the several new positions. I know it's maybe not something that we can do right now, and I don't know what the appetite of the board is on those things, but it is at least good to vet those ideas out now and see where we stand on them, even if it's not something to be funded now, but maybe to be looked at in the future. Or
well, we're happy to go into as much detail with those positions as possible, as needed. Just just so everyone's aware, both from the board's perspective and any of the community members watching, I mean, administratively, we recognize, the situation. We understand that we are projecting a year where we're overspending revenues and going into reserves. At the same time, though, there are opportunities for increased service levels, and we didn't want to completely dismiss those. So that's why we brought those forward in spite of the economic situation. In every case, we, going back to the presentation in October, we had forecasted that some of those positions would start pretty, either halfway through 2021 to try to save on how much the impact would be next year. But still recognizing the fact that it's at the cost of perpetuity, something that would have to be budgeted in 2022 and so on. So we're happy to go through those. The department heads are here to answer any questions. Yeah, so what can we answer on that front? The one other point, which is critical, is that we weren't tying any of these positions to any kind of millage change this year. We were building the budget on neutral revenue on real estate. So we presented the positions in conjunction with the budget, but there's nothing that says that the decision has to be made at the exact same time as the budget. So while we do need the board to adopt a millage rate for next year, the conversation with regard to these positions can be ongoing.
Well, so I know what I'm, interested in here. I mean, I'd like to hear about the police accreditation and the position for the engineering department. So those are two items that I'm specifically interested in and better understanding. And not that I'm not interested in the others as well, but like in my mind, just like thinking and prioritizing or whatever. So
Lisa,
I don't know how anyone else feels.
Sure. No, Lisa, before you, we do that, would it be just beneficial to have everybody discuss everything for 2 or 3 minutes?
Whatever you want to do.
Yeah,
I mean,
I just think that they all can get a say, because this is, some of it may intertwine, some of it may not. And then we have a bigger picture, and the people at home have the big picture as well. And then maybe they could ask us questions if they hear something or something jogs their mind.
Thank you, Sean. I agree. I would like to hear about all of them. And I also think I'm prioritizing the same ones as Commissioner Borowski. But can you reiterate what the not in the budget positions that are being requested are? So the additional positions and funding that you have, you are requesting but did not add into the budget.
Sure, and I will, let me see if I can do this screen share again. And I can, I'll jump to that page. All right, so hopefully everyone's looking at the 2021 programming expansion requests. We have these positions here. We have a full year cost, a projected implementation date or a recommended implementation date, and then what the impact for just the 2021 budget would be. So we do have the full-time emergency management sergeant, who would also be our police accreditation officer. We have our 2 officers for the high-density patrol areas. We did include a line item for the police accreditation. This particular expense is for the contracted service to get our department accredited. That would decrease significantly in future years. Then we have our GIS coordinator and our project engineer for the engineering department. And then we have the fire inspector identified here as something that we would talk about next year, projecting for a 2022 hire. So those are the positions that were recommended or requested of the board for consideration now. We did identify some other things that were not included in the request that are still kind of on the list and things to be evaluated going forward. But we prioritize these as important enough towards either service delivery and or decision making to include them on the list now.
I guess
Bill, is this page from the budget? I didn't see the page. I did see the not included list, but I didn't see this in your summary at the beginning of the budget.
Yeah, this is included in the presentation that we did back on October 19th. I don't think the same table is in the budget.
Right, I don't see it on the page here.
Yeah, I'd have to flip through.
Yeah, I see it on page 6. It talks about not included items, including the tree crew and the fire inspector. So I see that on page 6, but I just didn't see the top piece.
Yeah, I mean, that's correct, and that's probably something we should have done better with in the budget document itself. But just to be clear, yeah, none of these positions are included in the numbers at this time. They would only be added if they were approved by the board. And in fact, I think the mechanism would be a change in the township's organizational chart, just to make sure that it's documented in a public way.
So, Bill, is there maybe this helps us get into this conversation? If not, I will hold my, revisit this. Is there anything in the proposed budget that you are recommending that we are reducing expenses by a certain amount? Is there any large expense item that we have that we've taken a look at, because we're also looking at a deficit budget and not contributing to OPEB, and so all of those things are costs. So is there anything that we can look at that has been removed or rethought in order to make space for an added revenue item?
Yeah. So first of all, that's a really good question. And the real simple answer is that what we've been doing for the last 8 years is trimming the budget as much as we can operationally to fit within the revenue amounts that were approved. And again, many of those years were 0% changes in real estate taxes. So, more than half of our expense budget is tied up in personnel. It's the people that we employ to go out and deliver the services, which does not give us a whole lot of wiggle room when it comes time for, anything significant. There's always, in a budget that includes $35 million, there's always areas that we might do better than expected in. But every department, when putting the budget together, did so with the understanding that it's basically, exactly what you're doing to offer the same level of service today, or offer the same level of service tomorrow as we are today. So the only opportunities for significant changes would be in areas where we wanted to change service delivery. So if there's something that we prioritize different and something that we don't really want that we have now, it's difficult to really generate a lot of money, a lot of savings.
So nothing was identified this year that is a service that we think we could trim back.
Yeah, because unless we were talking about reduction in headcount. And that, as we sit here now, that's not something I would advocate for or recommend. I would rather keep headcount where it's at and continue these discussions ongoing until we're at a point where we can consider adding.
Bill, getting to that point more, I know that we discussed about that. So some positions, remain unfilled, and others you have budgeted for the full salary. But for instance, you don't have an assistant, or Bob Tate doesn't. last February, there was you, the manager, and Bob Tate. Now there's only two of you. You've budgeted for a replacement, but if we don't fill that within the first 6 months, that's kind of a give back, so to speak, in the budget. Am I correct with that? So there,
Yeah, no, I mean, that's correct. And when we do budget the payroll, we assume that the positions are filled throughout the whole year. So, I mean, that's kind of what I was inferring to when I said in a budget that includes 35 million, there's always adds and puts and variances one way or another. And in almost every case, it generates some sort of, I mean, our goal is to come in under budget, and that goal is easier to achieve because most of our expenses are on the payroll side, and we're not going to, I mean, we cannot hire more people than we're authorized to hire. So that's a number that we're just never going to exceed. In most cases, payroll does come in under what is estimated for that reason, because there's retirements, there's resignments, there's always some ups and downs in those numbers.
would it be possible, based on what Maura's saying and what you're saying, is if someone wanted to take an extra week unpaid to do that, where the township would save money, or would that create a bottleneck of work because we're, quote, short staff already, we've just bled it down to bare bones? So if, I'll throw somebody out there. I did that last time. I'll do it to you again, Steve Norsini. If Steve Norsini decides, hey, I want an extra week off, and Bill, you're like, yeah, you can do that. And we, Steve would take that unpaid. Would that help at all? Or is that just too hard to do when it comes to, yeah, I mean, it's probably an accounting nightmare, and you may have issues with unions, et cetera.
And just to clarify, because he's on the call, this is purely a hypothetical. Steve Norsini is not actually allowed to take an extra week off in real life. We need him.
Yeah, I'm aware, but I did that to him before, so I'll do it to him again.
Greatly appreciated, Commissioner.
Yeah, no, that's a complex question to answer on a public meeting.
Okay, I apologize then.
The topic would be better discussed in executive session.
Okay. My apologies.
Yeah, because you named some of the significant variables. I mean, we do have, most of our staff is unionized. We have collective bargaining agreements. Any kind of furlough or change in pay is not as simple as just asking.
Yeah, let me stress again. It'd be purely voluntarily. We're not trying to furlough anybody. If someone had 2 weeks vacation and their son is graduating in California and they want to take an extra week off, it's something to do that. But again, if it's an issue of, of personnel and staff, then it would be best.
Well,
Yeah.
I would say that, people are being furloughed all over the country. So this might be done in executive, but the idea of furlough is a way that some organizations are making it work.
I'm not suggesting furlough. I'm suggesting.
No, I know you're not, but I'm suggesting that we don't take anything off the table right now. If we're talking about the budget and the health of the municipality, I think that everything's in play. And furlough is one way of helping get out of a deficit.
Yeah, and I certainly recognize that. What I would advocate for or strongly recommend is that, while we still have enough cash that we're in conformity with our fund balance policy, and that amount exceeds $9 million, if we get to a point after 2021 where we are still struggling with business taxes and struggling to correct the operating statement to the point where, some of those tougher decisions are necessary, then absolutely. But I think as we sit here now, because of the strong financial position that the township has put itself in through, the decisions made in the past, I'm just not sure we're at that point yet. In fact, the conversation started with contemplating, adding some folks. So I don't want to.
No, and I'm glad to hear that. And I am also not advocating for furlough, to be clear. But, we are talking budget and we're in a tight place. But I do appreciate the surplus that we have.
Yeah, and just sorry again to touch on, I don't want it to get where it's so bad that we have to do that. I don't want to whittle down our rainy day fund and then before you know it, we have to do it. I think that we need to be projecting a couple years out so we're not in an emergency situation where we're left with a bad choice and an even worse choice. So we have the $9 million. Obviously, we don't want to spend it. We may have to, but I think that, we should be pretty prudent with, it's not our money, it's the taxpayers' money when it comes to the long-term picture from COVID and then the aftermath from COVID, because this is all COVID related.
So I think I hijacked this a bit and we were going into asking people to make a presentation about the additional roles. So if anybody wants to do that, I'm ready for that now.
Sure, I'll kick it off and then we'll start with our police positions. And so I'll kick it off and then hand it over to Chris to carry the ball. But with regard to the full-time emergency management and police accreditation officer, in my 10 years here, we have activated the OEC at least once a year, sometimes multiple times per year. For 2020, it's been activated pretty much the entire year. So the benefit of having a dedicated officer, from my perspective, that is managing emergency response and emergency preparedness is only becoming more and more important and critical. And in many cases, our response to an emergency is not limited to just our resources. We're partnering with various entities and agencies, and this person would be dedicated towards ensuring that those cross-agency relationships and lines of communication are open, that they're tested, and that everybody is ready to go and they know their role. That will ensure that any kind of response needed given the situation is pre-planned and prepared for. And I think having that level of preparedness is worth the additional officer needed to get us there. We've been in this position pretty much all this year. We've had the person working in this capacity all year because of the pandemic. And they've been able to make some progress on some of the areas that we know are critical in emergency response. And that's the emergency response plan. It's making sure that those contacts are up to date, that everyone in that plan knows exactly what their role is and how to do it, which obviously requires lots of training and testing and conversation. And it's pretty much an all the time preparedness so that you're ready to go when you have to throw the switch. So it's definitely something that it's only becoming a higher and higher priority given circumstances, both man-made and Mother Nature-made. So that's why we brought it to the board this year. Chris, I'll let you fill in from there.
Thank you, Mr. White and Commissioners. The job will also be a joint position where this Office of Emergency Management position would help coordinate our request to move forward on becoming an accredited police department with the state of Pennsylvania. This is an enormous step for us to undertake. It is one of the highest standards of professionalism in police work currently, and the spotlight is on many police departments, as you know, for various reasons across the country. The Pennsylvania Law Enforcement Accreditation Program has over 140 standards that would take the police department to total compliance. What's exciting about the PLEAC process is it involves from the ground up vision, where they meet with staff, make sure our principles, training, and national standards, which change every day, every month, every year, are currently up to date. So it's not something that you finish. It's normally a 2-year process by the team approach of bringing in a professional organization and having a staff member, which about 20 to 25% of their duties would be to assist and maintain the accreditation process and keep it moving forward. We believe we can accomplish this task in 1 year, which is basically cutting off an entire year. Along with that, Mr. White really addressed what the emergency standards of planning response, whether it be man-made, a collegiate championship, or planning and organization, so that we're set up to run with the great staff that we have. And the emergency management coordinator not only does our internal township staff and brings us together, but it also brings our other first responder agencies, nursing homes, colleges, and everything else into one playing field, one organized playing field. And I would like to mention that as we talk about business taxes, and we've seen some exciting changes in our business district, that future events, I think, will have a different look, and having an emergency manager who focuses on the primary safety of those events as we grow is critical to have our township remain on the top as it is, in my opinion.
Can I ask a question, Chief?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. The cost is cost initially is about $33,000. What is the ongoing cost after that per year, or year 2 or 3? Because if you don't get it done,
They've given us a $10,000 to $11,000 window once the initial, as you can imagine, the first load is massive. The first carry is massive in the process. And once we get it up and running, it should run very smoothly following that. Hopefully to the point where it would manage itself.
okay. So I don't doubt that this would make our police better police. Do the insurance companies, do other vendors, unfortunately, that we have them just, and I hate trying to monetize safety, but this is the budget. Would that help with some insurance? Would that help with some kind of benefit, having this certification, to your knowledge?
So in the presentations, they have mentioned that agencies are eligible. I have not been able to confirm that. I've actually spoken to Mr. Tate on this issue. So we are looking into it as we potentially get closer to a kickoff. But I don't want to be quoted that it definitely will. I know on the back end of liabilities and other things and taking up of time, if there is an incident, that having these proofs and this accreditation, obviously, if you were chosen or selected after going through the process to be accredited, does streamline that operation and reduce back-end costs with the insurance company and or attorneys if there was a situation like that arising.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chris. What we can, if there's no more questions on that position, we'll jump into the high density beat. And Chris, I'll let you carry the ball on this one. I just, from my perspective, in electing to bring this to the board as a recommendation is one of the things that we struggle with is patrol. One of the conversations we've had quite a bit on individually with commissioners is patrolling in wards. This concept would increase the ward patrols somewhat by allowing 2 additional officers to stay dedicated to the high density area. And I'll let Chris go into the details on why he feels that those increased patrols and response time in that area is so important.
Thank you, Mr. White. We are proposing the Board of Commissioners and the Township Manager to consider adding 2 officers to what we call the high density beat. We had given a proposal which showed basically a red outline which ran corner to corner of our township that would supply officers would remain in that beat during the general business week, give or take an hour or 2, where they would remain solely there for emergency and quick response. That serves 2 functions. We received a report we were on a conference call through the Delaware Valley Intelligence Center, where a presentation was made by the United States Secret Service for 29 statistics on active shooters. They gave some time frames. They gave some other information that I consider secure. It's not a public document that I could go over in a little bit more detail, but for security reasons, I'll keep it quiet. But clearly, it showcased the areas that you should patrol and be able to rapidly arrive. Before I get into just that quick description, I would like to assure the commissioners and the community that they are safe and we provide adequate patrol. However, as times change, just like medical practices and other initiatives strive to provide better services, we as well want to follow the trends and follow what is happening across the country. Active attackers, not just shooters, are still a prevalent danger. COVID has slowed that down. We've already had two to three incidents of active attackers during the COVID spree across the country, not here in Radnor to be very specific. And we want to make sure that we're able to meet the challenges. And our issue is when we start to get busy with the 4 beat cars and 1 supervisor, as things go on, it could take us 5 to 10 minutes to get from one end of the town, such as Bryn Mawr or Broomall, and respond rapidly. Most of these incidents now are over in the 4-minute mark, meaning you have to neutralize the target within that time frame, stop them from attacking. Otherwise, mass loss of life could occur or other damages. So we'd like to provide that service. There's a second function that is equally important, that it would allow the beat cars, our township is split into 4 major beats. It would allow them to stay in their beats more frequently, as the high density beats would be a backup to the primary car in those zones. So we would see more police in our regular streets, not getting pulled all the way across town due to call line.
All right.
Can I just, oh, I'm sorry. Can I just ask quickly about, go back to the, so the emergency management sergeant and the tie-in with the accreditation. So once that's finished, would that be the majority of this, the responsibilities of this position for 2 years? And then, I mean, I realize there's other responsibilities around the, you know, OEM and what has been being done. But for 2 years, would this be the majority of the responsibilities of this position?
Yes, and about 25% of their time would be spent. The accreditation process, again, the exciting part of that is it is ongoing. Once you sign up, it doesn't stop. It's not a book. It's not a plaque that gets just hung on the wall. You must maintain your accreditation certification, and they will do random inspections in every 2 years where they come in and reevaluate everything they originally approved. They will also deliver any new standards or issues. So this position would handle that. There's a lot of upgrading in our computer system for testing, new standards, new policies that would be added in there. The event planning and storm management, I did forget to mention in my initial, is it would be a liaison with Delaware County for all the emergency management things that go on, which has been a big push of the county. So that would be, you know, continuing on. They'd be evaluating all of our school safety initiatives, working with our officers who are already trained in building security and how to assist with those, and continuing those functions, which are generally ongoing. And we usually visit all the schools every year in some capacity, and that would be one of the other jobs that would be taken over by that position.
Okay. And around this accreditation, so we've got then the, I guess you asked, there's the funding, the $33,000 for the consultant to help support that and I guess pull that together in the 2 years. Is this $33,000 for just 1 year? Is this over the 2 years? Is this over the course of all, you know, is this an ongoing thing that we would need to have these consultants, or is this really just to gain the initial accreditation, then there's just the maintenance of keeping it up? And also, what additional expenses do we envision coming out of this? So you mentioned computers and things like that. Like, are there things that, you know, additional things that we might need to invest in order to get this?
Yes, ma'am. So the initial cost is to attempt to obtain this in 1 year, as I stated. So that would be that $33,000 number. And then following that, we have it between $10,000 and $11,000 a year to help us maintain compliance. At some point in time, once you've proven yourself to the accreditation division, usually it goes a lot smoother, and I believe we would be able to run it ourselves. I would be remiss to say when that would happen because we've never undertaken such a massive project before. So it's the one-time high-level fee to get started and then get up and running and maintaining the program. And no other expenses. Our infrastructure that is well designed by our IT department and some other purchases we've made along the way in preparation. For example, there's a big training module called Power DMS, which is a training and policy tracker, date, time that an officer took it. We already have these items, so some of these things we're already set up for, so I don't envision any capital expenses. There could be a tweak to a doorway or a compliance, or we would have to add non-slip flooring to, let's say, a garage so somebody doesn't slip in the water. Those are the type of things that they come up with. So it'll be a couple of things that, you know, we'll have to travel across as we go, but I don't envision any capital items.
Okay, thank you, Chief.
Chief, hi, question about, would we be able to accomplish this accreditation process without any new hiring?
I think it would be tough. It would definitely take it would take that approximate 2 years. So it would take a little bit longer for sure, another year at least. And it would be we would have to pull some other duties from other people. Our people are pretty busy handling different stuff. And it requires a true attention to detail to meet that goal.
Thank you.
Yeah, just to add to that is the discussion of accreditations come up the last couple of years, and we always run into that problem, Commissioner. You know, let's do it, and then when we get down to how those tasks would be divvied up amongst the folks that we currently have, it always becomes a bit of a non-starter. Otherwise, we'd be accredited already.
So Chief, the last couple of years, we've had the proposal for additional resources for school officers, and school shootings were part of the justification for those additional resources. Now we're transitioning to having high density or the business district area. What's caused the change, and why are we not talking about schools anymore? Now we're talking about the business district.
Initially, we asked for 8 the previous year, Commissioner Abel, and specifically some of those duties would have included what I just proposed. I feel that my recommendation and the manager, understanding the circumstances that the country is, and specifically Radnor Township, we felt it better to just start building blocks. If you look at the high density beats and the hours generically that they would be operating, it encompasses almost all of the schools in Radnor Township. Literally, our top priority is the safety of the children. And I think the board and the manager have always told us that to be the main goal and one we believe in and follow through. So they are a part of that. The report that I advised you, we've shared with the other schools to make them aware, because it goes into some depth about the levels and some of the incidents that occur at the school level. So I agree with you, and the high density beat, I believe, handles that. Would I love to see it 24 hours a day, 7 days a week? I would, but I think this is a stepping stone in the right direction to using statistics, data from an independent source that studied these national issues, and we're making a significant step in the right direction.
What strikes me as an obvious issue that brought up by Jake is, well, since the schools are closed or are closed to some extent, why not shift resources from there to the high density areas? And also similar to that, remember Villanova has hired, and they have their own police force now of 10 people or thereabouts, 10 10 certified police officers. So that reduces the patrol that we've had to do in Villanova. So that seems to me that that should open up some staffing. And as we talked about last week with the county offers to buy us a vehicle, but then we see, well, we're going to put in, we have $150,000 a year guy that we're going to staff it with. So seems like that the county should pay for the emergency services that they want, rather than the Radnor taxpayer budget that's going to go to the entire county. So if you would address those 3 items, please, Superintendent.
Yeah, well, Mr. White, in his program, if you look on the spreadsheet that he had given, the high-density beats don't start till really the halfway point of this coming year. The emergency management coordinator, we wanted to get started right away on obviously emergency planning for all the events that I've gone over, and start the accreditation process, since it is a year-long process. The officers would transition towards having multiple roles. And I did forget to mention, one of the lieutenants here reminded me about community satisfaction with very prompt service and response would be another goal. These are our busy areas as well. So I just wanted to add that in. Again, sir, the school district, or I shouldn't say the school district, but every school in Radnor Township, as many of them as possible, are covered in the high density beat. And again, the beat officers now for the schools that aren't in the high density beat now have more time to patrol those respective schools and provide the added service and our community walkthroughs that we do. So I think the plan does help with that, if I'm answering your question. In reference to the county, I agree with you. If they wanted to help fund this or other projects with staffing, I think it would be great, because we would utilize it in some facet based on what we had or where we were at.
Well, along the same veins, what about the school district? The school, why isn't the school district contributing anything to this high-tech security that we're providing?
Chris, you're on mute, sir.
I apologize. Commissioner, I can't answer if the school district gives us anything for that item.
No, they do not.
Well, shouldn't they though?
Well,
I'm not sure that this board can do anything.
Well, I'll just answer the question for you. Yes, they should.
Haven't we always patrolled the schools though? We've always provided that service for years, since my kids were little at Ipon. I don't think the school district's ever paid for that.
yeah,
Isn't it all fungible anyway?
I would
Same taxpayers.
I would imagine that the school district might, if they were to contribute, would want a greater share of the service dedicated to their buildings. And the way that Chris and his department is approaching this is township wide. So that includes all of the private schools as well, which doesn't make it impossible, but it complicates the calculation.
Have we seen the crime rate going up in this high density area? Have we seen the number of drug incidents within our schools skyrocketing? Have we seen crime rates in our high density retail areas significantly increasing? What is prompting the need for the focus on this high density area?
The prompting has been one, just our basic experience. There are some staffing studies which we have crossed over before. I think the commissioners would pass out if we did one of the 2 nationally recognized police staffing studies based on call volume. I think the numbers would be higher. I don't want to quote because we did them a couple years ago, so it wouldn't be responsible to give out a number. But those numbers were higher than what we're proposing. So basically, it would cost more if we used a sort of a national study based on the call volume, Commissioner. But going back, we definitely know that our bank robberies and other things, whether we have a rush one year or not, all happen within this high density zone. Not to say there are not other crime emergencies that occur in the beats, but it just allows us to give that prompt response. And I will double check if I can. I believe I can at least send the executive summary of the Secret Service report they were using as a guideline, just to be prepared for that. So I could give you some of that information. I'll just double check its classification, but we would go over that also offline if you would like to, where it could lay that out. Just where active attack incidents happen, long and short, at schools and shopping malls, shopping areas and restaurant areas. So I think just from watching TV, we know that as well. And I just don't want to sit back one day and say, I wish I had made this presentation. I think it's responsible based on our call volume and other things. I did not do an exact breakdown of that specific beat that's demonstrated with the red lines. Those red lines were made to really include our schools, where I would probably narrow it more down just to Lancaster Avenue. But I believe our goals here from your guys' leadership and direction is protecting the students. So we've kind of stretched those lines to give that added patrol to the schools. So it's kind of a two-part answer. I'm not dodging it, but I just wanted to let you know how those lines grew, Commissioner, and the information and just personal experience, and not wanting to flood you with a number that just is probably unmanageable at this point in time if we did one of the national studies based on call volume.
Thank you.
Can I just ask a follow-up to Damien's question? How would this, in regards to response times, if we're at X, we would go to Y. What's that difference? And I know obviously you don't know, but in general, have you mapped that out, that it would help response times 5%, 10%? Is there a metric or some kind of number or opinion that you could add to that?
It's hard for me to say, right? I can't answer that right now. But what I can say is that out of the 4 primary beats, when we start to get busy, we have a major crash, nothing dramatic, but just a major crash in the center of Wayne. It requires 3 to 4 cars to be involved. And this would allow these cars to be able to be prompt response and stay in the hot zone, which again is those business districts and schools and restaurants in a nutshell. And that would allow us to just transfer and be as response oriented as possible. Sometimes a bunch of incidents happen, and then sometimes in one centralized area, and then other times they're spread throughout the municipality. So it's a little hard to give that projection at this point in time. If they were up and running for a year and I could show their response times, it would make it a little bit easier. But right now, if the 2 Wayne cars are tied up, a Broomall and a Bryn Mawr car have to come up to Wayne, and vice versa. If it gets busy in Bryn Mawr, Glenbrook area, then they have to come from Wayne down to Bryn Mawr, and I think you guys know what the drive is like that.
So I don't want to cut off the conversation about this issue or any other issue, but we've been talking about it for a while now. We're not voting on anything today, so we get a chance to talk about it again when we come back. And there are some other positions that we should at least touch on. The GIS coordinator and the additional engineering position, I know. Do we have any last thoughts on this before we move on to something else? Okay, Steve, do you want to talk to us about the GIS coordinator and the additional engineering position?
Yes, thank you, Commissioner. And first, I would like to echo the manager's sentiments. Staff is fully aware of the economic hardships that the pandemic has put on some of our residents. So taking that into consideration, I think if you saw on the manager's chart, one of the options was to hire later in the year, which reduces the cost for 2021. But as he did note, it is a cost in perpetuity further out. So I'll start with the project engineer. The thought with the project engineer is that some of the costs of this person's salary, this guy or gal's salary, will be covered by the fact that some of our smaller stormwater projects, which due to the fact that staff doesn't have time to engineer, we have the ability but not the time, that this person could do them. So instead of paying X dollars to an engineering firm for some of our more basic ones that don't include a lot of modeling and so forth that the bigger firms can do. This person could do that. So over the course of a year, now this is definitely driven by the projects the commissioners pick. Over the course of a year, tens of thousands of dollars could be saved in those project design costs, which basically cover his or her salary. The other major thrust for this position would be if the township does move forward with the amount of projects that are on the books, that is a huge amount of projects. So I will tell you, currently, we have more projects in design and construction than any local government around here that I know. Not just quantity, but magnitude, the size of those projects. We have the project list of a small city, and this person would be dedicated to managing some of those projects. That would be their focus, his or her focus. Again, we understand the economic hardship, not just of our residents, but that the township's going through. So there are options. Again, a lot of what this person would do would be driven by the board. If the board went forward, I don't know if you recall, the manager had put forth a draft funding program for I think it was for about $12 million worth of projects. That's a sizable amount of projects that would need to go forth. And that person would be instrumental in getting that done. And as you noted on his chart, this is also a position that can be budgeted for later in the year, which reduces our 2021 costs. But again, it is funded further through the rest of the time. As far as the GIS component, that person, the GIS coordinator.
Steve, I'm sorry. Do you mind if I jump in before we jump off
Absolutely.
that position? There's a couple other elements to the project engineer that I think are critical. The first is, part of ensuring that the township is able to continue to operate is having succession planning throughout the organization. Steve does a fantastic job, and is somehow in 1,000 places all at the same time, pretty much all of the time. But part of what we would hope for out of this position is to be a junior person that Steve can train, in the unlikelihood that someday Steve wants to retire. Not that we're going to let him, but it's still something we should probably think about and plan for. So that's the critical part, and that actually speaks to the timing of adding the position in terms of priority. Just making sure that they have, because that to transfer knowledge to the extent that to transfer the amount of knowledge Steve has about Radnor Township, our infrastructure, all of the issues that he has seen firsthand is going to take years and years and years and years. So it's important to start those conversations now. So again, Steve's going to be here forever, but it wouldn't be bad to have another Steve out there helping him out. So succession planning is definitely part of what we wanted to bring this forward now for. And then just to add a little bit on the cost piece of it, the chart, we're projecting around $45,000 roughly per year out of the general fund for this position. Obviously, the position would cost more than that, but we're allocating the rest of those costs to be directly paid for by the projects. So if it's a stormwater project and this person is designing it, they would be paid for out of those project funds from the stormwater fund. If it's a sanitary project, the same thing. If it's a bond project that we've borrowed the money for, they would be paid for out of the bond proceeds. So it would be a direct cost accounting to the individual based on the project that they're doing. In terms of the accounting side and time tracking, all that, we have the infrastructure in place through the software to do all that with absolute accuracy. So it's a position that out of all of them, this is one that, there is other revenue components that will help pay for it immediately. And as Steve pointed out, there's no shortage of projects that are currently in design and ongoing. And we've talked about for years the list of projects that don't have funding yet. That is, a pretty expansive list itself. So there'll always be projects to do. There'll always be items for this person to design. There's always residents calling, looking for assistance on stormwater or this issue or that issue. This is another resource that the township will have to be able to respond to those calls. Those are some of the reasons why we wanted to bring that forward. And then not to steal Steve's thunder on the GIS, but I'll jump into that, and Steve, you can fill in the blanks. But basically, the GIS, in real simple terms, is a global information system. It's a map-based data consolidation software, software that we currently own. But what we lack is time and resources to extract the data from the various points, whether it be the police software, whether it be existing GIS with our infrastructure mapping, whether it be finance or recreation or any of the township departments, or even the fire company. We could help the fire company if they so desired with this software to transition from intuitive-based decision-making to data-based decision-making, or at least some combination thereof. So, we talked a moment ago about tracking crime rates and drug incidents and response times. The GIS software is something that can help us actually calculate things out and show a component of decision-making that is data-driven. But it takes a high level of expertise in the GIS software to speak that language, to efficiently take the data that we currently have loaded into the software and help us get some meaningful data back to help make those decisions. So the GIS coordinator, that would be their role. They would keep all of our maps up to date on an ongoing basis. They'd be working with every single department in terms of providing critical information on how we allocate resources. Public works, are trash routes efficient? Can they be revised? The GIS can help us map that out. Same thing with the police department and in tracking crime and incident activity and mapping that out and helping us to make decisions. In terms of infrastructure replacement, all of our infrastructure would be loaded in, and it would be loaded in with a current status, a replacement cost, an expected life, and then you let the software tell us and map out what the replacement plan might look like. So the limits from the software are endless, but it's without the expertise to extract all that, it's not something that we can really utilize at this time. So the GIS coordinator, that's the primary goal of that person. Again, it would be a shift in decision-making to something that's a little bit more data-driven versus what we're relying on now. So, Steve, I don't know if I missed anything pertinent, but please feel free.
So for what Mr. White said, I guess I'll piggyback. So a geographic information system as a planning tool is huge. It is absolutely huge. And I think each department in a previous life, we relied very heavily on GIS. It is a great planning tool, whether it be for police. I know Kevin and ComDev feels the same way. But I would like to add, it's also a customer service tool. So whereas we will use it for planning from anywhere from where you're going to put sewer lines or where the crime hotspots are or whatever, it also gives an employee the ability to have information at his or her fingertips. So when someone calls, you can pull it up, and given that person the time to get the system loaded up and running, we can answer a lot of questions from our desktop, as opposed to, we'll have to call you back. I need to go to the basement and see if I can find those plans. Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. So in reality, we are light years behind many other townships. It's like we're still using a fax machine instead of an email with what we've been doing with the lack of GIS. What we have is great. It's a rudimentary tool, but without this position, you're never going to take anywhere near the full capacity of what this the Esri Geographic Information System provides.
And just one other thing, because we did send out a PowerPoint presentation on this position to the commissioners. In that In that PowerPoint presentation are a list of links from what other municipalities are doing with GIS. And that's just, that opened my eyes quite a bit, to be perfectly honest. So I would certainly encourage everyone to go and visit those sites. There's some communities doing some pretty amazing stuff with it.
Currently, we have the software. Are we using it in any capacity? And second question is, what does that cost us per year that we're underutilizing something? Are we paying an annual cost towards it?
So we are utilizing it. I will let either Steve or Kevin respond, because those would be the two departments that would be utilizing it at this time, just because of the infrastructure piece. In terms of our annual maintenance, I don't have that number. That's something I can look up and report back.
Thanks.
Commissioner, I use it every day. Even in its current form, it's still a good amount of information about a parcel that we can look at. I mean, it's missing a lot of the pieces that we need to make it fully functional. Each department's going to want different things, different layers, different abilities within the software. But even in its very basic form, I use it all the time. It's replaced Google Earth and Google Maps and all those things, as well as having to use the county site for descriptions of site, whether it be zoning, square footage. So I used to be very adept at GIS until I came here. So it's been a big void. I'm glad to have it back.
Similarly, Commissioner, we use it in ComDev daily. In fact, not only are we using the current Esri software, but we're also using the older map info. We have all of our mapping in there for zoning districts, our HARB. We track our student rentals, our traffic home occupation. So we are in there, and aerial photography, floodplain locations. So those are all tools that when permit applications come in, we need to take a look at to make sure that they're doing what they need to be doing in those areas and that they're permitted. So it is something that we rely on quite heavily.
In its current use. So do you have any gaps that having a dedicated person would improve your use?
Absolutely. As I mentioned, I go back and forth between the old system and the new system, because the new system, when it was brought over, does not have all of the layers loaded in. They're not updated. And we would like to be able to update the, for instance, the student rentals. We don't have, the last time that was updated was in 2009. Don't have the ability to update that with staff limitations. We don't currently track traffic home occupations. We have to go back through and do searches on the database and then try to map those manually. So those would be all things as applications come in to be able to look at something, have the person responsible update those so that it's just at, as Steve mentioned, at the tip of our fingers.
Thank you.
We don't have any of the infrastructure on there. None of the sanitary sewer, none of the storm sewer, none of the various drainage areas, watersheds, bridges, traffic signals, parks, none of that is on there. And that's where it really becomes a fantastic tool. If you get to the point where we can click on a sewer line and we can see when it was last repaired, when it was built, how big it is, how old it is, what type of material it is. And that's just a real small piece of the pie, but that all ties into the infrastructure planning that Mr. White talked about. So it's got zero on the infrastructure side.
So do you see this as a phased project where somebody comes in to get the data in, and then they also become sort of the super user to kick out reports, or is it a fixed term where you just need somebody to come in and get everything updated and train people?
So in my opinion, you need somebody to get it up and running. And one of the issues is if you don't update it constantly, it loses its usefulness. So if your parcels aren't updated and your infrastructure isn't updated, you're looking at something that's 5 years old, it's possibly bad information. So you need that person to get it up and running. as well as maintaining it every day, every year, in my opinion.
Can I ask, Steve, so you did a nice job, I think, with the project engineer and talking about how that salary could be offset by limiting, pulling back on the consulting dollars that we spend. So I'm looking at that slide that Bill had up earlier, and I see for 2021, it's 33,750 that you estimate. Is that with those dollars pulled out, or is that still the 33,750 you anticipate being, I guess, supplanted by the state cost savings of not using consultants? Does my question make sense? Can you guys hear me?
Yes, it does.
Sorry.
So one item is, again, so it's really the projects the commissioner picks, the commissioners pick, that will drive what this guy or gal designs, right? So, and what they work on and where they're billed from. So we're thinking of, and speaking to the manager, it's the smaller projects that we spend $13,000, $15,000, $17,000 for design, that if this person can do 2 or 3 of them, that's $40,000 to $50,000 that we would have paid to a third-party consultant, to a private consultant.
Okay. So the $30,000 or $50,000 would more than cover the $33,750 or $45,000 for full year cost of this position, correct?
Well, what we're projecting that position to cost is about $120,000. So that's fully loaded. That's wages, benefits, the whole lot. So we offset that with about $75,000 of design costs that would be allocated to the specific projects. And that, in the estimates that Steve provided, that's about 5 projects per year, which seems extremely reasonable. In any year, there could be 7 projects, and then that's even less money that comes out of the general fund. So what we provided was an approximation based on roughly designing 5 projects per year, and those costs being paid for by the projects.
Okay. And to this GIS person, is there functions that are being performed, or that, let me rephrase that, not necessarily functions that are being performed, because I know we're not putting out consulting dollars for a GIS consultant or that kind of work, but are there things that would end up being benefited that could help us offset the cost of that? So by having all this data, is it helping to inform in some way that we might have normally used a consultant or something like that?
Yeah, I don't think so. Certainly our decision making should be more accurate, which brings with it some efficiencies. But they're not anything that when we were preparing this, could nail down to a number that we felt comfortable presenting to the board and the public. So yeah, I mean, the quick answer is no. We're going to have to pay the engineer to design. We're going to have to pay the construction company to construct. The police department, if to the extent they use it, it's not going to save us, having the need for a patrol officer actually out there doing their job. Same with, any of the other departments, whether it be ComDev, recreation, engineering, any of those. So unfortunately, there's no direct cost savings that we can quickly identify for that position.
Can I, Lisa, are you done? And despite what I was saying earlier about asking people if they want to go on vacation, and please, in general, I think it's great when we can do things in-house, and I've always been a big proponent of that. So I think I'm definitely, I'll say right off the bat, having a junior to Steve Norsini when he does go on vacation, I think is great. Now, that being said, as I said, I love to do things in-house, and we don't have a public works. We don't have a director of public works, but having a dedicated crew to maybe do some of these smaller projects, would that be more cost effective than having to contract that out? I know that there are other costs associated with the purchasing of materials and buying in bulk, as well as equipment owning versus renting, et cetera. Is that something else that could be looked at as a cost savings for these smaller projects that are, we have hundreds of, if it's not one thing, it's a sidewalk or a culvert or something along those lines. Bill or Steve?
Yeah, no, I mean, with Mike taking over in his acting capacity, he's already instituted some of those changes. We've had a couple different pipe projects that I think historically we might have hired, a piping company to come out and insert, and they did it instead. I think if Mike were here, he would tell you that, that it might take a little bit longer with our guys just because they can't dedicate themselves to a specific site for a great deal of time. They get pulled in too many directions. But at the end of the day, it does save us some money, and the staff enjoy doing it. So we've already kind of started moving in that way to the extent we can with resources. When we talk about some of the other services that we're outsourcing, and we've talked a little bit about tree removal or at least tree maintenance, that's definitely one that we'll take a look at. We're not at a point right now to make a recommendation, but to the extent that we can look at those, we certainly will. We do a lot of the services in-house now. A lot of the services that we provide are with our guys and gals. So we're doing a lot of that now. It comes down to infrastructure, and then trees is the other biggie.
Okay, so I guess the question is then to look at hiring 3 or 4 additional public works to see if that could kind of pay for itself as something that we could look at down the road.
And Commissioner, just to let you know, to do the capital, I don't mean to interrupt you, but before you go to do the capital projects we're talking about, to construct them, there would be an outlay of capital funds for different equipment.
Sure.
And some different folks, that have some expertise in those areas, whether the equipment is rented per job or leased or purchased, but there would be capital outlays because we have a great group of guys that are ready to go in, but we don't have the equipment to install a 12-foot deep sewer line down a road or an underground stormwater management system.
Yeah, and I did. Your screen was dark, but I did make mention. I don't want it to seem that I'm too naive, and I understand there's, like I said, materials or certifications to use some of this heavy equipment as well. But again, like I said, I like to try to keep what we can in-house, whether it is tree cutting or road striping or whatever it is. In regards to the GIS, so there may not be any cost savings with the police per se, but if they can become more efficient, you're not going to be able to put a number on it. But if they can become more efficient and being able to mine that data, it's obviously going to be a metric that's going to be difficult to quantify, but maybe over time you could kind of see crime is less in one area. So again, I it's definitely something to look at. If we're that far behind, I guess as a follow-up and to kind of steer it back, would that have made a difference, the updated GIS with that house? And I just want to put it in Ward 7 terms, with that house on Garrett Avenue that was built 7 feet too tall, would that have caught it or not?
No, Commissioner, that was an error caught during, or not caught during, the plan review by our third-party consultant.
Okay, so
would not have factored into that.
Okay, all right. But yeah, in general, if we can use it and always find ways to pay for itself, I think it's it's always something that's beneficial to the township.
If this is a good break point, then why don't we move on to the charitable contributions that we make? The big ones are to the fire company, sorry, to the fire company, to the senior center, and to the library. We also generally contribute to Surrey Services and to the Radnor Historical Society. I'll point out that a lot of these organizations have had, or should have had, substantially reduced costs over the last year, and will have reduced costs for some fraction of 2021. They won't necessarily have, well, I guess we can't guarantee that they're going to have a one-for-one reduction based on what we don't pay them naturally. But the reality is that a lot of these guys have the ability to recover some of those funds. It's also going to be tough, frankly, for me to argue to residents that we should continue to make donations on their behalf to Township 501c3s at 100% of our historical levels, which is what is being proposed in the administration's proposed budget, when we are diving into our reserve fund substantially to pay for next year, and while many residents' taxes are going up. In spite of the revenue neutral requirements, the reality is that because of the way the reassessment is being apportioned for residents versus businesses, and just as between and among residents, a lot of people are going to see their actual tax dollars go up, even though the tax rate is going to go down. So it's a tough sell for me, frankly, to say that we're going to fund all of these organizations at the exact same level that we were funding them at last year, when, not to pick on the library, but the library has been closed or offering reduced services for a large fraction of the year, when the senior center is closed or offering reduced fractions for a significant fraction of the year. So that's kind of telegraphs where I am, but I'd be interested in the feelings of the group.
Okay, so you know that I'm going to have to say something about that. So Jack, first of all, I think for you to assume that these organizations don't have the same operating expenses is not a fair assessment. You know, a lot of these organizations have property that they maintain, and that is still there. They do still have staff that they are paying. You know, certainly, and a lot of them are still offering services in a very creative and appropriate ways. I will say that certainly the senior centers, the senior center and Surrey Services are offering food services, invaluable food service to our senior citizens, increased numbers who are food insecure. So I think that that is not an accurate assessment, unless, of course, we know for a fact, and they have come forward and said, hey, our expenses are not what they were, and perhaps that is something we should ask. So I don't want to assume that you're speaking out of turn, but you know, perhaps we should at least find out if that is the case.
Did they submit, I'm noticing there are a couple NAs on the request submitted. So I'm assuming that there's a process. Do we ask for their budgets to review in this application process?
No. Historically, no.
But they do make a request. I'm going to assume that they made the request, and it looks to me, and Bill, did they not make a request? I mean, it looks to me that everybody, with the exception of the Broomall Fire Company, has asked, and Wayne Arts Center have asked for the similar amount to last year. And the Historical Society has asked for a reduction. So.
Yeah, so we had come up with a one-page request form for them to fill out this year. This was the first year that we had sent those out. Historically, we had invited them to meetings and That was always a difficult meeting and conversation to go through because it was, I mean, for obvious reasons. So this year we did the request form. And so what you're seeing on this page represents what they've asked for. The NAs are ones that we did not, at least at the time we submitted this. The only hesitation there is I think Bryn Mawr Fire did ultimately submit something that said the same as what you've given in the past. But yeah, that's the amount that we're showing in the proposed column or the request column is what they had asked for.
So
So
the Bryn Mawr Fire Company needs to get $193,000, even though they didn't ask for it.
yeah, I mean,
Or
I
they-
guess that's my point is, was there a deadline? Did they have to submit a proposal of some sort? And did these two that say NA miss that deadline to request the funding? And if so, what is our policy going to be around that?
So we did ask for the information back within a certain time. Everyone that you see on that request form with dollar amounts submitted within that request time. Being that this is the first time that we've gone through this type of process, you know, we didn't have any kind of consequences on the back end, at least discussed out ahead of time. So this is, you know, kind of where we're at.
Well, I'm going to assume the Bryn Mawr Fire Company can't afford for us not to pay their $193,000. So I think assuming that they need that is correct, and they do service a large part of the township. So.
Yeah, and I apologize. I don't have it memorized. These went out back in late September or mid-September. So let me be absolutely sure on when what Bryn Mawr Fire did before we go too far.
I'm going to suggest, Lisa, that, well, never mind. Let's talk offline.
So are these all accounted for in the budget as proposed? The amount proposed is reflected in the proposed budget.
That is correct.
Okay.
And you know, the other thing, and Jack, I hear your point, and you know, I think Rich has made this point before too about, you know, the township funding 501c3s. You know, but the majority of these groups are providing vital services. You know, certainly the fire companies. I think that our senior centers and Surrey services, and I guess we could take a scalpel to this and surgically cut or whatever, but you know, unless we're going to cut a substantial amount from this, you know, I don't know where exactly it's going to get us, you know, towards funding something else, or you know, what, I don't know what exactly we're looking. Are we looking to completely cut out what we fund for the library or the senior center, which are things that I, you know, can't advocate for in this moment. You know, sitting on the board of the library, their expenses, you know, granted they're, you know, I think their expenses on, you know, when it comes to the operation, overall operation of the building is not as, you know, is not as much as it has been in the past, because you're right, they were closed for a while and whatnot. But, you know, if we decrease for them now, what happens when they are open again?
So at the library in particular, we do have access to their budget because two of the board members from this board also sit on the library board. So we can just look at where they stand, and we should know that. I can't speak for others. My proposal would not be that we slash anybody's budget by 100%. I do think that it would be reasonable to just ask that the township's contribution be reduced by 10% across the board. Everybody has at least had the opportunity to realize some savings in 2020, which means that they should have the money that we gave them last year in what amounts to a reserve fund, which they could pay forward. And the likely reality is that in 2021, they're going to have the same opportunity to realize some savings. So I think the 10% is a reasonable split. The fire company is probably the exception. I imagine that they've been going on just as many calls. There are still accidents, there are still fires. But
I can speak to that if you'd like.
I'd be interested to hear it, but I was going to say I know that they also received a grant, which is not a fortune, I recognize, but it does kind of reduce our obligation, I hope.
So those grants are specifically in terms of some of the staffing hours, which was accounted for in the 975 that was asked for and granted last year. I can tell you, and to address the same kind of line of points that Commissioner Borowski raised, the number of fire calls has not declined. The number of EMS calls, while I haven't seen recent data, I believe has increased fairly dramatically due to COVID and the responses that the fire company is dealing with there. And the number of calls in terms of areas like Cabrini, Eastern, Villanova, these areas has remained very consistent as well. So while the pressure on some other organizations in terms of operating being closed, I think, it is perhaps there, even though they do have some of the same costs. The operations have really seen an increase in some areas with the fire company. So I think that it is the wrong year, given COVID, to be looking at decreasing funding in terms of the fire company.
I would, oh, sorry, Daniel, I thought you were done.
I say fire company because Bryn Mawr is, while responding to fires, does not have the pressure of EMS response that Radnor Fire Company has. They do not operate from an EMS perspective, and Radnor is covering the entire township on that. I'm sorry,
I'm not advocating for, sorry, did I do it again, Damien?
No,
So
I was just giving you the mic.
Excellent, thank you. I'm not advocating for a reduction or anything this year, but I would suggest that if we are making contributions, over $2 million, all of these organizations know how to submit proposals, have written grants for other entities. And I know very few funding organizations, whether it's a government or private, that don't require some sort of information. I don't know what the form looked like this year. I like that there is one that was implemented this year, but I would suggest that we look at finances and that sort of thing, and let them state their case and understand the proportion of the budget that we are contributing. So I would hope that for the next budget, on this one, I'm not advocating any changes, but I think that the more information we have about the organizations we are supporting, given that there are a lot of other organizations out there that would, be interested in municipal funding as well. These have been selected probably over year after year, but I think we should get to know them a little better.
I'll jump in here, Jack. I think that I'm kind of with you, where I think that we need to make some hard decisions. 10% to me is arbitrary. I think some may have to go much further and some may not have to move at all. But I don't want to be arbitrary and say 10%. When it comes to, and I hate to single these two organizations out, like the Wayne Senior Center, as you said, and the library, they're great to have, they're great assets, but the township shouldn't be paying people if they're not there to work. And I don't necessarily know if that's what you were advocating or if that's what Lisa was advocating, but these are hard decisions. And for me, I think that we need to have something much more comprehensive than we want what is the same. Things aren't the same. Damien's right. Maybe Radnor's on more calls, so they may need more money. But if something is closed and shuttered for 75, 80% of the year, giving them the same amount of money doesn't make sense. We need to look at all of these and all of these organizations and to decide and really define what is a necessity and what do we pay and what do we have to, in this case, furlough until things get better for the township and we can afford to fund them again. And I'm not saying that I don't want to fund the Art Center. I don't want to fund the Historical Society, but let's start prioritizing what is the necessity and what isn't. And for those things that are the necessity, what is necessary within that necessity, and the things that aren't a necessity, what is necessary for them to, be able to keep the door open for 2 years to make sure that the pipes don't freeze, and look at that scenario. So I think that we need to look at it a lot more than 10%. And we really need to look at some of these budgets and ask for budgets. If you want money from the township, from the taxpayers, we should see your budget and see where this money is going, not just taking a number that pretty much hasn't moved from last year. So that's kind of my opinion on this stuff. Again, this translates into what we do with our staff, and that should be that's our priority. That's the purpose of our organization, is for the township. These are, to a certain extent, one-offs and secondary. I don't want to say that the fire is secondary. The fire is not, but some of these other organizations are. So a little long-winded, but I think y'all get my point.
I think we need to really look at this. My recollection when Eamon came, Damien, was that he said that there were less calls for fire, there were less accidents because there was less people driving, and that there were not as many calls for COVID, but for other items. But we ought to know exactly what that is. These guys, they really can't just come in and say we need the same as last year. We need to know what they're really projecting that they're going to need. I recognize that they probably have kept everybody on their payrolls, but if they're closed because of COVID and they're going to have COVID lockdowns and they're going to be closed in the portion of 2021, they really need to take a hard look at this and see what they need. Otherwise, I think it will be appropriate just to do a across the board reduction of some percentage.
So I would definitely ask that before we consider any of that, that we hear from these groups and these organizations to better understand, what that means. And also for all of us to understand that I think once we cut things out of the budget, it becomes very difficult to add them back in. And, so when these groups are back to full operation, which hopefully will be by the fall perhaps, then they are going to be looking at moving forward at a deficit in a time when nonprofits are having an extremely difficult time fundraising, at raising funds. I was unable to attend the last library board meeting because we were on our exec session last week, or the week before. But, they are, the library, their big major fundraiser, the Owls for the Shelves, a race, they can't do. They have been unable to do that. And they are providing services. They have been providing services. And it is slightly frustrating to me from when people make sweeping generalizations without really knowing what is happening operationally. And again, the senior center, to single them out, they are feeding people who are food insecure right now. So that to me is something. And the other thing, to the point of, we are the township and we are the, these are township groups. The people who are on these boards are township residents. They are the taxpayers, the majority of them. I think there's probably only one group that isn't really in the township. So they are the taxpayers. They are the township residents. I'm willing to consider, looking at this, but I think the reasoning behind this is not sound right now, and I'd like more information. And literally, we have a week to do so, to find more information.
Well, again, Lisa, the only point is if they're closed for 2 or 3 months, which they probably will be, are they paying everybody exactly the same? And if they are, they need to tell us that. But otherwise, we know that they were closed for a portion of 2020. We know that they're not serving the same number of people. So we got to have more than just we need the same as last year. So that's the way I feel about it. I don't think it's talking out of school. We know that there have been lockdowns, that there's been less people, and we need to have a clear idea, and they need to really project what they need and come to us with it. They can't just say we need more because it costs more when we shut down. That's not going to get it. That's not going to cut it. So,
Bill, can I ask you a question with this? Do we have to have these numbers as part of the budget? This isn't like property taxes or employment. This is kind of like the extra, kind of like the excess that we can spend. Do we need to put these numbers and have these percentages in the budget, or can we kind of wait on them once we hear from these organizations and then decide after the fact? Because this is stuff that I guess if we decide we could do we could make it, we're really making donations. We could make a donation in March or July or something along those lines. Do we have to do it for the budget? Is it necessary by law, or can we wait? That's my question.
None of it's necessary by law. In terms of the timing and planning, I think these organizations, when they're preparing their 2021 budgets, have a line item in there of expected money from the township. So, I'm sure from that perspective, they would rather know sooner than later. And then with the library, we give 12 installments. There's nothing that requires us to give 12 installments. So if we don't have a number by the end of January, then they whatever it is, maybe only 10 or 11 installments. So again, it's up to the board on how we distribute this money. It's probably a good idea to keep the appropriations in the budget. If something smaller is ultimately determined, then that's fine. But at least in the budget, the expenses are accounted for in some capacity. So we're planning on the expense side for something.
So the arbitrary thought of cutting it 10%, I guess I'd be interested in, I'm no math wizard. What does that look like? What does that gain us? Is the end goal to try to fund one of these positions with that money? Is it to try to lessen what we're going to have to dip into the reserves for? If we're already dipping into the reserves, which is what I think the reserves are meant for. If we ever had a rainy day, this is definitely a rainy day. I don't disagree, and perhaps we can assess from them, maybe they can look at their budgets and say, how can they share in some of this with us? But then I am afraid moving forward and their operations are back to normal, where do they go from there?
At least our
so the 10% number is mine. So let me jump in for a minute. First off, I'm not wedded to 10%. I'm not wedded to any particular number. I'm not wedded to a particular
What end goal are you wedded to in looking at cutting these? What's your end goal?
Salaries for the township staff?
We have the
Well-
salaries for the township staff built in. I mean, all of that, everything that we need is there, correct?
No,
We are going
that's
to
not
dip in-
correct.
We'll be at a deficit.
That is not
Are
correct.
we,
We
so
are
that
going,
is the end goal. Is the end goal to not dip into the reserves? Because then we need to find $1.8 million, or give or take, correct?
yeah,
We have a million things, Lisa. There's a million things we need to prioritize. So the question, I think this is putting the cart before the horse. We need to prioritize. But while I have the floor real quick, I'll just say this. As long as our funding is down from our mercantile tax, I think everybody unfortunately needs to share in the pain. And when things go back up, they can share in the, we'll have more money to fund. We'll be able to share in the gain, but it's a gain versus pain scenario. There's no greater way to say it. You're right. It is hard to, no one wants to always, once you take it away, it's hard to put it back. I get it. It'll be easier to put it back once we see our tax revenues go up.
So what does 10% look like?
$200,000.
Yeah, over $200,000.
Okay.
So
Thank you, math people. I'm not a math person. Thank you.
And my question is, how are we distinguishing between mission critical services like emergency services and some others that are critical, but perhaps not mission and life critical in COVID times? That is just a key question I think we need to ask ourselves too, in terms of these proposed
Well, I like the
cuts,
Life
whatever
Center.
they may be.
I like the Art Center, but I don't think it's life or death to have the Art Center.
the Art Center is such a small fraction of what we pay. I think that if we're going to cut, then we probably need to include the Art Center. We need to include the Historical Society. We need to include services, but those aren't the guys who are going to end up moving the needle on this. It's the library, the fire company, and the senior center to a lesser extent.
So I think we're getting into a conversation that we don't have time to finish. To the point is that, we're at the end of this discussion. These organizations have, been in the budget for years, and I haven't looked, but I'm thinking they've been at similar levels. And, and this is a big conversation, and we should be having it. If we are making donations, we should have a structure and a process to do so. But I don't think we have time to do that tonight. So I would suggest that we, when we vote on the budget, you're conscious about whether or not you can approve a budget that has these contributions in it. And then moving into the new year, we create some sort of process that is a little bit more transparent.
Maura, this is your first year on, and I apologize, the dog's barking in the background. This is your first year on doing the budget. This is my third, and this is the third time we've had this conversation, and nobody ever wants to have that plan. And when we talked about it last year, if we're not going to hit our revenue numbers, we have to make cuts. Unfortunately, nobody's willing to make cuts.
Well, again, to me, it's not about the cuts in this case. It's a matter if it's open, if it's paying the people the same or not. That's what we need to know. What is their level of business due to lockdowns and reductions in people being out using the facilities?
Now, Rich, we shouldn't be dipping into the general fund to be funding external organizations. We have to find, we should be finding cuts to cover the budget. We shouldn't have to dip into the general fund.
Well, Bill, is there any reason, I'd be willing to bet that all of these organizations are highly motivated. Is there any reason that we could not anticipate getting a very short memo from them in advance of December 7th, just letting us know where they stand vis-a-vis their income versus expenses for calendar 2020 and what their expectations are for the same in 2021?
Yeah, no, we can definitely put that request out there. In the budget document under the community organization section is the forms that they submitted that kind of outlined what the amounts were that they were asking. It doesn't go into a lot of detail. It was a one-page form, so it was impossible for them to. But we can certainly put the request out there as you laid out in terms of how COVID is impacting their budgets.
Yeah, I mean, that they're spending significantly more dollars because they are providing either a new or a different service or a greater service that they haven't provided in the past that is COVID-centric, regardless of whether they are open or not, then my thesis probably doesn't hold. If they are providing fewer services but they're just getting fewer dollars in as well, they may only be spending 80% of what they originally had, but they're only getting 70% of what they had. So again, my thesis wouldn't hold. With respect to the only organization where I have the budget, that's not how I read it, but I'd be certainly interested in hearing what they have to say. I'd be willing to bet that we could get that data from everybody in advance of our December 7th meeting.
We'll put the
We
request.
do have a sheet from each one of them, and the budget allocation request form is in the packet. So they do have a couple of lines here, but so if you're saying, Bill, that, hey, we talked to them and they all say they all are operating just as much as they were in prior years, despite restrictions on due to COVID, and they anticipate, despite restrictions in next year, that they're going to do the same, then that's fine. I want them to affirmatively state that, but I still would think that we ought to look at trimming.
So, I mean, Rich, thank you for pointing this out. So I'm looking, and oh my God, this is so small, but if you look at the senior center, COVID-19 has amplified the needs of the older adults we serve. Physical distancing has increased social isolation and loneliness amongst older adults. In response, Wayne Senior Center has launched an innovative virtual hub, Wayne Senior Center Connect, and established free technology lending library, pilot program to ensure most vulnerable members without access to technology are not left isolated. SupportNet Social Services Program is providing vital outreach to our most vulnerable and immunocompromised senior, and it looks like maybe there was more and it's not here.
That's all
that just doesn't tell me though what they're spending versus what their income is.
Well, they do have the budget numbers on these forms.
Yeah, so their total
Overall,
yeah, go ahead, more.
Sorry, it's got the overall annual budget and how much they feel that they contribute to Radnor Township residents, and the number of township residents served. So I mean, there is some basis for the number that they've submitted.
It just doesn't give the issue of how much has the budget changed year over year with respect to restrictions and limitations on what services can be provided due to lockdowns. That's what I want to know about.
Well, I think that would be very interesting to know, Rich. I agree with you. And like I said, and I'm just going to speak to the senior center because I feel like I saw I think maybe Studio 21 did a whole show, and they are going out and delivering food to people who are isolated and shut in and providing meals and things like that. So, and I would argue, as someone who participates in this and the organization that I work for, those costs are actually more because you're paying for transportation for people to take things to people who normally used to come to you. So there are still costs involved in providing these services. And I would also be interested to know if their number of 1,500 residents they serve, if that number has gone up. I mean, these were submitted when back in September, Bill, you said?
Most of them are early October.
Okay, so I mean, their numbers may have gone up since then. I mean, we're talking about people who are being hurt and people who are in a bad way and how we don't want to raise taxes and things like that. These are those people. These are our residents.
I hear you. I still haven't heard how this is affecting their numbers. And I know that these numbers always go up and they never go down.
But Jack, we haven't heard because we didn't ask.
Please do let me finish. Please do let me finish. I haven't gotten this sentence. It doesn't matter. Whatever. We'll do whatever.
When you're done, can I make a statement? One more. Jack, do you want to finish? Finish what you have to say. No, you're the president. Finish your thought, please.
No, you guys understand my position on this. I haven't seen the data. I basically understand that there are people on the board who want to funnel money to nonprofits, and I think that's an admirable goal. But this is a year in which we're asking people to pay a large amount of money, many of whom are going to be paying more in taxes, for organizations that are not necessarily the ones that they want to fund. I have concerns with it every year. We all do. There are many nonprofits in Radnor Township that I would like to fund that are not going to be funded by the township this year. And the ones that we've selected sometimes make perfect sense to me. I get why we fund the library. I get why we fund the fire company, but I am unclear why there is such resistance to asking the question, are you at budget, below budget, or above the budget? That's not a hard question for us to ask, and I'm confident that we'll get the answer quickly. And if they all say, we desperately need the money, we're above budget, then fine, the conversation is over. But if they all say that we've got a tremendous savings, then we should do something about it. We're obliged to.
Jack, are you asking for their audited financials?
No, I'm just asking them to tell us informally, where are you in the budget process?
Okay, because I'm at the point, I'll take it one step further, that if we're going to give township money when we're struggling ourselves, I would like to see their audited financial numbers. I think that it's not that I don't trust them. Again, I'm with you. I think everything that they do is admirable. But if they're coming from us, coming to us for money as they've done in the past, they've done it in the past. It's different this year, and I think that's one thing. But we should know exactly what their situation is, and that will help prioritize us. So I will say that unless I can see audited financial numbers of last year or the closest thing to it for this year, I'm going to have an extreme difficulty, using taxpayer money to fund these organizations. And I'm not saying that they're not good causes. I'm just saying that, we need to watch our pennies. And I think, and we need to make sure that they're doing the same if you want money from us. And I don't think it's that much.
Are you going to get those statements in the next 4 days?
Well, and if somebody's on a if someone's on a calendar year, they're not going to have an audited financial report for 2020.
Well,
and if somebody was on a end of June to July fiscal, then you're not going to have it either. And it's also going to be skewed because 6 months we're in the pandemic and 6 months they're not in the pandemic. So I think what you're asking for, Sean, and I don't disagree. I think it's fine to ask them. What Jack is saying and what Rich is saying, I think that is fine to ask them. But what you're asking for, I don't think is going to be available. And if you're going to wait and make your decision based on that, you're going to be waiting because you're not going to have information.
That's why I asked Bill that question. If we could carve that out, and I don't want to put any of these institutions and these organizations under more stress, but I don't necessarily know if we're under any obligation to give them an answer, in 7 days. I think that this is a lot of money. We're stewards of the township, and we need to act accordingly. And waiting another couple weeks or months to do so, we won't be doing our jobs. We are stewards of this is not our money. This is not our money. And I think that we need to realize that we are stewards to the taxpayers.
And these services serve the taxpayers. In many other townships, the township runs the library.
Sure, and the society and the historical society. I mean,
the historical society is what, $15,000? Not that I'm saying it in that way, but
that's
why don't we just ask?
That's half of the what Chris wants for his computers or someone's salary. No, I think we need to look at every penny. I think that's the problem, that we get it's 15,000. These little incremental dollars add up. So I'll let me finish. I'll say, I'll just reiterate, and I'll say this again. I am happy to wait till I have more knowledge. I don't want to make a snap judgment, but waiting until we get all the data I think is important, and we need to start looking at every dollar, and $15,000 adds up over time. That's all I got to say. I'm done.
So we'll get the requests out to all the organizations for updated COVID-related impacts on them financially. I think a lot of them, we do get their financial statements. I don't know if they're audited financial statements. To Lisa's point, she's right. Usually audited statements take quite a bit of time after the balance sheet date to get pulled together. So unaudited statements might be a little bit more timely and prudent or available. So we'll put the request in. We'll get it all aggregated as quickly as we can and get it out to the board ahead of Monday's discussion. Just in terms of decision making, I'm not advocating on behalf of the organizations. The dollars add up for the township for sure. But based on funding all these groups in the past, I think they've become reliant on the money. So if that's going to change in any way, the sooner we can let them know, probably the better.
Well, two points, Bill. One, we've been having that discussion with these organizations for 2 years, letting them know that something, we have to come to some policy, and 3 years later, we're still not there. So I think warning has been given. I mean, if we're not going to take a long look this year, we're never going to take a look, because I don't know when we're going to have a worse year financially as a township. And to the point that every dollar matters, I wish everybody has that mindset, just not at budget time, but through the year. It's I could go back to 5 or 6 different projects where we've added on costs which were $10,000, and people just shrugged it off like it's just $10,000. But you're right; those do add up.
Okay, I think that we've kind of talked this out. Let's move on to our next item, which is COVID responses. My understanding is that we are now explicitly free to impose additional COVID restrictions that exceed those of the governor. We are also, of course, as always, free to restrict the services that we offer. And now, given the surge in COVID cases, it seems appropriate for us to have this conversation.
But just real quick, as we start the conversation, just wanted to update the board in terms of administratively and how we're operating. We've reverted back to the modified protocols within the township building, keeping the lobby and the folks that are coming in to do business with the township separate from all the departments. Within the departments, we've asked departments to stagger folks to the extent they can, and have folks working in the building or working at home, and then staggering those, switching them on and off where they can. That's a lot of the departments in this building. Where that doesn't work is in police and public works. Each of those departments have their own set of protocols requiring, cohorting to the extent that they can, keeping leaf crews separate and public works, keeping, trash crews separate, not allowing for, the morning gatherings around the table, and the end of day gatherings. Folks are, getting picked up at their cars. And so a lot of those protocols have been implemented, and they've been kind of ramping up as we've gone through. So as we operate, our goal has been twofold. First of all, to keep the employees as safe as possible in their work environment, being that the township and the services that we're providing are essential and required to be continuous, and at the same time trying to meet that goal of continuing to provide those services while at the same time keeping our employees safe. So Chris Gluck and Marie have headed up the OEM team on that front. It is a daily effort, and they continue to do it every day. When we have close contact cases that become known, they immediately go into action and working with those employees and those other employees that were in close contact to make sure that the protocols that are established by the state and CDC are followed. So, I mean, we're happy to go into details operationally. I'm sure that I don't think that's what this conversation was for. I think it was more maybe the public facing, but in either case, we're ready to answer any questions that you may have or provide any input that you need.
I'll start. It's going to be very unpopular. Then maybe we need to have some kind of mandatory mask mandate at the township building, or for every staff member that works for the township. So it's going to be unpopular, but I know that it doesn't happen. I'm not calling anybody out, but it seems that when this first thing started, everybody was good. Then they kind of get lackadaisical. Then cases spike, and now we're trying to play catch up. So it would just be, you're in the township building, you may be 20 feet away from somebody, but you have a mask on unless you're, having something to eat or drink. I get it. It's unpopular. I'm not trying to single people out. I'm sure everyone in some scenarios guilty, but this is it. This is it from now on, going until COVID's done. And I don't know how we define how COVID's done, but not that we're playing catch up and defense to, the red level, then it goes back down to an orange level, whatever these, whatever kind of coding that the state or the feds make. I don't know your opinion on that, Bill, but that's.
Yeah, I'll let Sergeant Gluck jump in too, but there is a mask policy in the building when folks are up and moving around. When they're at their desks and working, depending on the size of the cubicle or walls that they have around them, is whether or not they need to have that mask on. I will admit that there's times where some folks are better than others. I think over the last couple of weeks, as folks have, learned through, watching the news, that folks are a lot more sensitive today than they were, say, in October or September. But the mask policy does exist here. And I also want to make it clear that, there hasn't been any case spreading that has occurred within this building or in any of our departments. So there have been some folks that have contracted the virus, but it's all been outside of work. So Chris, I don't know if you want to provide any more detail on that particular.
Yes, sir. Our interim protocols, the newest version, the 6th version that's been put in place on November 20th, does include on page 3 wearing of masks. And it does say all staff and customers are required to wear masks or face coverings indoors and outdoors, even if you're able to physically distance from others. So that mandate's already been in place, sir. Also, per these protocols and the efforts by all of our staff and all of our department heads, we have done a lot of mitigation efforts, cleaning, staggering work times, keeping staff away from each other, moving back to the main lobby customer service areas. We've actually made it extra careful for everybody. So we haven't, as Mr. White has mentioned, we have not had any spread inside of our facility.
Just so, what's the protocol if an employee doesn't wear a mask? I mean, who tells them? What happens if it's their senior? And I'm not saying that I want anyone getting in trouble, but how does it work? Not that you want people to tattle, but again, these are pretty crazy times. We're talking about our budget and everything, and we want COVID to end. Again, I know it's unpopular, but to have a policy, if it's not enforced because you're scared that it's your boss or you're uncomfortable or, it's the one reason.
Do you know that the policy isn't being enforced? I mean, I'm wondering why this line of questioning, because I'm confused.
Why?
Do we know
Lisa,
that people...
Lisa, because I've
Are
been...
you just making up supposition? Are you just
no,
musing
Lisa,
on what
Lisa,
is
let me finish.
potential?
Lisa, I've been in the building and I've seen that it hasn't been enforced. And and my question is who would I tell if I'm
Well,
a
you can
subordinate to
always tell
somebody?
me. I mean,
Okay,
I'd be happy to pass that along. I mean, the way it works in our hallways now is, and at desks, if someone doesn't have a mask on, they're asked to put a mask on. And I have not had a single person tell me that has, they've pressed the issue and it's become a problem. So this is the first I'm hearing about it.
Okay.
But I don't think the governor included this language in his messaging 2 weeks ago to, coming at the Radnor Township building. I thought there was a bigger issue.
I mean, it starts locally. That's all I'm saying.
No new government mandates.
Is there anything that we want to do with respect to the parks? Is there anything that we want to do with respect to the tent? Is there anything that we want to do with respect to restaurants and other organizations? We have the ability to do that. I don't frankly love the idea, but since we have that ability now, we should at least have the conversation.
So are you asking us as board members for that? Or, I mean, all along we've been following the direction of the OEM. So, I mean, I guess I don't have anything to add to what they've already put forth, what they've shared. I know they've reduced the number of people in the tent in Wayne and things like that. So that's kind of all I have to say on the subject. So I'm comfortable with whatever our staff and the OEM have recommended.
Based on the report that was issued last week and the numbers that we were looking at in Radnor Township, as well as, and I don't know, was it Jen O'Mara that put it out, Representative O'Mara put out something about Delaware County. I forget where I saw this, that the death rate has remained very consistent. The infection rate has gone up, but slightly. I think that my feeling on this is until we see those numbers spike, which we very may well see in the next week to 10 days, given that we're just coming out of Thanksgiving, my feeling is that we hold the line for at least this week. And now we may be revisiting next week based on numbers, but the numbers and the science, I think, is what we follow. And I will agree with Commissioner Borowski on the directive from OEM. But based on those two things, I don't see any need for any new restrictions. Not right now. 10 days from now, a week from now, we might be having a completely different discussion.
I think I would add that I'm not concerned about the township building. I do think that the increased precautions, I'm glad to see them. I think it was the right thing to do. I think you may have heard me say this before, but the tent in downtown Wayne is a gathering place. And I know we say there's just one more month, but that's one more month. And we are, potentially going into periods where people who have been in school outside the area are coming back from places where I don't know what those numbers are, what that exposure is like. And we have created a public gathering space in the middle of our township. So I would.
Can I just add on to that?
Of course.
I would agree with that. I happen to on occasion be near that tent and around that tent, enjoy going up there and socially distancing with people. For whatever reason, on Saturday night, there was a band playing there that was very, very popular. My wife and I were out for a walk. We walked past there at 10 o'clock at night. And just based on my marketing counting on trade show floors, my estimation that there was easily 170 people in that tent, many of them unmasked. And I was stunned, absolutely stunned that we weren't policing that stronger. And I'm not one for over officious policing on that, because as I just stated, I'm up there on occasion, but I couldn't believe the size of the crowd that was in there. So we're not doing something right, is my point, with that tent.
Well, I'm okay with the tent being there because it's people's, people go there by choice. And Damien, I wish I had the luxury of going out at night and enjoying some of those experiences, but I have not been there.
Six pack. Meet me up there.
My issue is the consistency in messaging. So we'll get press releases from the township that are cut and paste of the governor's directives, which tell you not to gather, but then we're partnering with the Wayne Business Association to put up a tent promoting gathering. So, I would like to see less cutting and pasting from governor or any official messaging, and start having more Radnor focused messaging, talking about how we are dealing with the directives, what our guidance is, and how we are enforcing that guidance.
Just regarding that particular item, Commissioner Abel, from the day that the pandemic started, it was made clear at the higher levels of government that municipalities were not required to or asked to help manage the pandemic, mostly because municipalities don't have the resources to manage the pandemic, in addition to maintaining the essential services that we're required to maintain. So for that reason, from the outset of this, it was being managed at the state level, pushed down to the counties, who were then managing all of the aspects of the pandemic. You've heard us say on several occasions, so actually every time it came up, when questions are asked about specifics regarding caseload, whether they be, the positive cases, the contact tracing, some of the specifics around, the deaths that have occurred in Radnor, we get none of that. We're provided with no information. So we don't have the information other than, we happen up to drive by someone who doesn't have a mask on. We don't have any information to allocate resources to manage it. So our position from day one, and we've made that crystal clear, is that we are passing along the information that comes from the higher levels of government, who are the ones that are managing the pandemic. They're the ones setting the rules. They're the ones that are required to enforce them. So that's why it's cutting and pasting, is because it's their rules. We're just spreading the word to the extent we can. It's not something that we are in a position resource-wise to go out and really manage. And we don't have the resources to get into the restaurants all the time to make sure that they're following every rule. We've been through this all summer when we'd have incidents at parks where people are there that shouldn't be, or there's too many people there during the shutdown. You have to call 911. A police officer would show up, but that's taking away from the regular patrols that they're doing anyway. So it's a matter of resources and still being able to do all the other jobs that our folks are asked to do.
Well,
Understood.
It seems like we shouldn't be talking about restrictions then, if we know that they can't be enforced.
I do think there's value to telling people what we expect of them. Even if not every person follows through, there are going to be some people who are looking to the township for guidance. So telling them how many people are supposed to be in the tent probably has some value. It's not going to be a number that is strictly adhered to. I know that, but I do think it has some value.
Didn't we cut the number? Didn't I read in the memo that was sent, we cut that number to 30, and you talked to the Wayne Business Association, and there's only supposed to be 30 people in that tent?
Yeah,
Yes.
I mean, yes, that has all been communicated to the WBA.
But again, they have no way of enforcing that.
There is.
So if we don't have the police resources to do that, I mean, at some point, people need to be making informed decisions on their own. I'm not going up to that tent. I know that people are and are having a good time, and I'm supporting the businesses in Wayne in other ways as best I can. And I think that we need to, as commissioners, we need to be helping to push that message out as well, that, there is, people do need to be masked up. I mean, I spent Saturday, I was, helping with the Santa delivery or the drop off. And then I went into Wayne. I'm going to say every person I saw had a mask on. They were limiting the number of people that were allowed in the stores at a time on Small Business Saturday. So, I think that, I know that tent is a constant sore spot, but the only thing we could do is take it down.
Yeah.
Right.
We just take it down.
Yeah.
No,
No.
I was under I thought we were manning the tent. That's part of the
20,000.
The 20,000 was the detail that we had at the tent. So if the number is supposed to be at 30 and we have detail, how does it get to the 170 that Damien saw? So I recognize that we are not the state and we are not the county, but if we are going to have that tent and we're going to have an officer there, they need to be limiting the number. And then you've got a whole space where nobody can wear a mask because they're drinking and they're in a party tent. So that has been my concern the whole time, is that we do have this protocol of being encouraging and positive towards mask using, but not making it mandatory. And then we put up a tent where you can't wear a mask because you have a drink in your hand or a plate of food. And now we're not limiting the number to the appropriate level. So I have, since the beginning, been very concerned about that tent, and that it will in one night, it can become a spreader spot, and all of our hard work and all of our sacrifices are thrown out the window.
No, thank you, Maura. I think you hit the nail on the head here. And Bill, I wasn't trying to be hard on you or your staff, but it comes down to, these are township or government entities or buildings or one-offs. We don't want it to be a super, as Maura said, a super spreader event. So I mean, what is the enforcement policy, or do we need to have the emergency management team get one? And what happens if we leave this up to the Wayne Business Organization, or we leave this up to a private entity, maybe a restaurant? I'm just going to say in Garrett Hill, I'm throwing something out there, and they're not following it. Should we have something in writing where it is enforceable? I don't know if that's to the OEM or to you, Sergeant Gluck, or to Bill. I'm not trying to be critical of you or of staff, but if someone dies and we kind of look the other way and we're like, try to, pass the buck, and no one wants that. I just want to be proactive about it. That's really all I'm getting at. And I really hope that you understand the spirit here. It's not to make anybody look bad or to put a bad taste in their mouth. It's just about safety and keeping everybody safe. And some people are more vulnerable than others.
Yeah, no, with regard to the tent, I don't disagree that there is a conflict in messaging, a certain dichotomy there. But the discussions we've had publicly and the decisions were geared at trying to help the local businesses. And I guess up until at least this point, the goal of trying to help those businesses outweighed, the risks associated with, it being a potential place for the virus to spread. If our concerns are shifting more towards, let's be more concerned or conservative with regard to the spread, that's an immediate decision that we can jump on right now. We have been working with the WBA in terms of overseeing the crowding at the tent. We have agreements. We have specific agreements in place when there is a band playing that put certain responsibilities on the WBA or the person or entity that's hosting that band. If they are not following through and holding up their end of the bargain, then it ends. And it can be that simple. And it sounds like if there's hundreds of people in a tent, that clearly the, and
Sounds
I'm
like
not,
somebody needs to have a conversation with Kenny Kearns.
the businesses are literally doing everything they can to survive. It is a horrible situation for them, and it's their livelihood beyond the virus. So I certainly understand where they're coming from, and that's why I think we've been trying to help them out as best we can. But there has to be a certain amount of responsibility in that too, and that's something that we can address immediately. And that's specific to the tent. Now, some of the broader issues in parks and other public spaces, if the board did adopt the masking resolution, if there's other resolutions or pieces of legislation that you feel are important to reinforce that or other initiatives, by all means. And then, if we'll have to have a discussion on enforcement and, levels that we want the township, either police or codes departments, to be involved in. Right now, it's kind of a report non-compliance, and then we send it up the government chain of command to the state. As far as I understand, the state is not acting, which is, I mean, I don't want to get overly political, but it's their rules, and they're not enforcing them. And I'd hate to have the township in that position where we have rules that are difficult for us to enforce.
So I'm not going to beat a dead horse, but I'm not talking about rules about stopping a person on the street and saying you should be wearing a mask. I'm talking about offering the public an unsafe place to gather. So I just want to make that clear. I'm not asking for a mask mandate. I'm not asking to come into somebody's home and put a mask on them. I am asking us to really consider if, we are creating the appropriate balance between helping some of our business owners, not all. It's only a small portion of the township. It just happens to be the biggest town center. And encouraging people to misbehave in the middle of a pandemic. So it's been my concern since the beginning. I have, voted for the tent in the past because I do recognize the economic impact that this pandemic is having. But as numbers are spiking and things are getting more dangerous, we lock down parks and we reopen them. Now we've given a tent, we can take it away. I know it looks like we only have a month left, so maybe the point is moot, but it is a concern.
And Mother Nature and the weather may have something to say about it too. As temperatures get into the 20s, you're not going to have the crowds that you had there on Saturday night, my guess is.
Except for the heaters and when they decide to close the tent flaps, which they're not supposed to do, and all the other ways to make it more enticing.
Go ahead.
Let me just say, Bill, you have a thankless job. I'll just say this: it's very difficult to balance this. I know that, so I think we're going to pull you. Both arms are going to be pulled on each side. I don't necessarily know that there's a right answer, but maybe to come back with some suggestions of at least of how it can be better, how things can be better enforced, and we can, I think our number one mission to our residents is, I always say, to be a steward of taxpayer dollars, but it's to keep them safe. So there's a lot that we know about COVID, and there's a lot that we don't know about COVID. So I'll leave it at that. I do thank you for everything that you're doing, as well as you, Sergeant Gluck, and the rest of and you, Marie. I get it. It's not easy, but you have this daunting task to figure out. But thank you.
Is there
think
anything
anybody
else?
is misbehaving. I don't think it's people are doing anything wrong. The purpose of government is to protect individual rights. So any additional enforcement, I think, is really asking for problems. And I disagree with imposing local government restrictions or increasing our restrictions at all in Radnor. So I'm just totally in disagreement with Maura and Sean.
Well, Rich, according to your own words, you know, safety is paramount, and it sounds to me that you're almost, you know, contradicting yourself. Personal freedom means safety. That's how I interpret it.
Individual liberty and personal responsibility is what I strive for. Personal responsibility. You have to trust the individuals to take personal responsibility. Government
Rebecca
there.
resolved this.
Thank you.
Do we have any last comments on this, or can we go to public participation? Hearing none, I will look for public participation. We have none, so I'll move for adjournment. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Talk to you guys later.
See ya.